It is important for all of us to see the real world of autism and what it is like living with autism, the good, the bad, and everything in between. When my own sons were diagnosed over 30 years ago with severe autism, there were no Kate Swensons for me to reference. There was nobody like her that I could follow, watch, and learn what I could do, what this was going to be like, and to have a shared experience. So remember, my sons are 32 and almost 34. Google started in '98, Facebook started in 2004, and YouTube started in 2005. So guess what? None of those were available to me as a mother back then. So where did I learn about things? I connected with other parents, and that's why I've stayed involved with this organization for as long as I have, because this community has been my most valuable resource and my safe place as a mother. The value in being able to see someone share their autistic son's life in a thoughtful, meaningful, and honest way is priceless. Kate is someone I would describe as brave, fearless, transparent, vulnerable, and necessary. She shares her life, raising her autistic son in an authentic way that helps all of us know and understand the secret world of autism and feel we are not alone. It's my honor to introduce Kate Swenson.
If you know me, I hate tech stuff more than anything in the world. So I'm going to just set this down here. Okay, I'm so happy to be here, and if my husband was here, he would say I'll do anything for a full night's sleep. So I flew in from Chicago last night. When I was in Chicago, I had an ice storm, and so I brought that here for all of you. And when I was watching the news this morning, and I was up at 5 a.m. or 4:30, because I'm 2 hours ahead. So I was technically up at your 4:30, and they were treating it like a blizzard. And I couldn't figure out I'm like, what's happening out there? Why are people having trouble driving? But I guess y'all don't do well with the rain? Okay. Also, it's hot here. Okay. Sorry, it is, trust me. It's 21 in Minnesota right now. Okay, I'm so happy to be here. I just checked in at home. Sawyer forgot his lunch for the field trip. Cooper's going to Grandma's for one sleep only. Jamie's going to pick up some deer meat. Harbor got sent to the principal's office yesterday for being naughty in music. I mean, nothing ends when I leave. It just all keeps going. So I'm really happy to be here. I love it. Okay, so a lot of people think this presentation's about Cooper. That's what I hear. It's really about me as a mom and the transformation that I had to make to be the best advocate for him. And that's the part that no one talks about, and I wish they would have. When Cooper was diagnosed, I wish someone would have said, he's exactly who he's supposed to be. Help him along, encourage him, motivate him. You don't need to change him, and focus on yourself, and focus on your family. Autism is a family diagnosis, and I don't mean genetically, I mean it affects every person in our family differently. And the one that we're seeing a lot now is with our son Sawyer. Sawyer is 12, and he is a natural-born caregiver. And we're seeing him step into this caregiving role almost in a worrisome way. He's already very concerned about who's going to take care of Cooper after I'm gone. And we're really walking this path of honesty with him. That's what I hear from siblings. They want honesty. So we welcome these conversations, but again, no one prepared me for this part, and there's no books on it. So here's my beautiful family. I always say they're amazing when they're not moving. And I am in love with family photos. It's something I do every year. Our photographer has 2 autistic children, and she puts on her sneakers and is ready to run, and she gets the photos. It takes 8 minutes to do this glory here. And I said the meanest thing I've ever said to my family during these photos. Like, you better sit still. I'm getting them. The 2 in the back, they were doing the water bottle flippy game. They were making swords out of sticks. And look at my daughter's face. Yeah. She was like, I've been born into this. I got to get out. Like, that's what she's thinking. But they're amazing. So I'm Kate. I'm from Minnesota. I'm a wife and a mother. I wrote my book. I think it's going to be 3 years ago. I'll tell you about this in a second. I have another one coming out, which I want to tell you about too. I never thought I'd write a book. Didn't cross my mind. blogger. I started finding Cooper's voice from my couch when Cooper was 2.5, and it was on an old WordPress site. Speaking of the beginning of the internet, it was a long time ago, and I said to my husband, I started a blog. And he's like, what's the name? And I told him, I'm not going to tell you because I mostly want to write about you. Like how hard marriage is. It's so hard when you have a child. When you have children, let me rephrase that. It's so hard. But I picked Finding Cooper's Voice, not knowing that it would ever be seen by anyone. But I really thought that he just needed to start talking. That's what my mom said. Everyone talks, Katie. Don't worry, everyone talks. She would always say that to me. And so I thought just one day his voice was going to turn on. I really thought that was the answer. So I started sharing, not thinking anyone would follow me. Influencer, kind of silly. Business owner, Finding Cooper's Voice has become my life. I get to do this now. I get to travel around and speak and share our story. I love it. I love it so much. I love sharing to educators too. I love that schools are now seeing the value of having someone like me speak to all staff because our kids interact with everyone, and everyone should hear this story. Nonprofit founder, I started a nonprofit during COVID with my friend Amanda, and our sole purpose is to help other parents. That's it. We don't want anyone to ever feel as alone as we did in the beginning. Caregiver, I recently added that word. Caregiver has sort of a negative connotation. And when we think of caregiver, we often think of someone taking care of their aging parents. Can a parent be a caregiver? When Cooper was 2 and 3, I'd tell you no. I was just a mom. And did you hear my Minnesota accent in there? That just really came out, didn't it? He's just a mom. But now that he is this tall, he's 5'6", he has bigger feet than me, and I get to wear his sweatshirts, which is awesome because I buy him the cool clothes. I'm still dressing him, bathing him, doing his meds, making his foods. He needs 100% care. And so we have to start this discussion about caregivers. If you take one thing from me, we have to start talking about it. Caregivers need support. We can't do this forever with no help. So that gives me goosebumps because we have to start talking about it. And then advocate. Normally, and I usually have reluctant in parentheses. I'm not sure why it's not in there. Maybe it just got snuck out for some reason. But I was a reluctant advocate for a lot of years. When Cooper was diagnosed, it was 1 in 68 kids had autism. And when we took the drive home from the appointment, I said to my husband, I said, do you know any other kids with autism? We didn't know anybody. And we didn't know the role that we would need to step into to help him have his best life. And so I just wanted to help my son. I just wanted to plug the holes in our sinking ship and move on. Help him, get him to kindergarten, and life would go on. I realized really early, though, by advocating for one child, there's a ripple down effect. So if there's teachers, therapists, even parents, if you're seeing things that would help your own child in the community, starting a sensory-friendly event, or in school, getting the kids invited to the field trips, whatever it may be, fight for it. Fight so hard because you're helping so many kids, and maybe you're helping a parent that can't fight at that exact moment. So there's my cuties. Again, not moving. Love them. So this is Cooper. He's just turned 14. He was being Baloo the bear from Jungle Book. Yeah, that's how we got the photo. And then he was done. Back to the iPad. I mean, and getting an iPad out of family photos is hard. Like, we would literally, throw it. Snap. So I want you to know that Cooper is thriving. So he still carries the same diagnosis, severe nonverbal autism, hasn't changed. He's thriving. He's a really happy kid, and we're a really happy family. And when he was diagnosed, autism was presented to us as something to overcome. It just was. The doctors and the teachers and everyone told us, you gotta get through this, right? He's exactly who he's supposed to be. He's happy. He plays Miracle League Baseball. He hates sports. He plays for the donut after. And usually when he's up to bat, he will go like this to me, and I have to say yes to donuts in order to get him to hit that dang ball. Yeah, he's a smart kid. He recently learned how to ride a trike, which is awesome because that opens up more doors for our family. We got him a cell phone last Christmas, having no idea what that would look like. We didn't know, would it be anything besides YouTube? And he can text. He texts me his Christmas list every single day. And yes, Christmas is 12 months away. Yeah, we're getting ready. He wants to go on the Amtrak again, this time to California, actually. He wants to see the whales. But I'll tell you, we took the Amtrak to Chicago, which was 8 hours. My husband almost didn't survive. And so I said, what about 28 hours to California? So I may be doing that one alone with Snoops. But he also, it opened up this world that I had no idea. And he's always had a speech device. The cell phone is even greater. If there's any way you can work this in with your kids, he texts me. The things that he can text, I had no idea that he could spell like that, or read, or search, or find. It's just been this beautiful gift. And he has 2 best friends, Peyton and Dexter. I talk about them a lot on my page. I didn't know what friendship would look like for him, if he'd ever have a friend. I didn't know. And we go to birthday parties all the time. We have a very busy social calendar, let me tell you that. Cooper has a lot going on, so he's doing amazing. Sawyer is my 12-year-old. He's my social, athletic, popular dude. Again, I worry about him the most. And I try to focus a lot of the conversation on the rest of us interacting and living alongside autism. Harbor is my velociraptor. He does not have a caregiving bone in his body, so we do not leave him alone with wheelchairs or babies or Cooper, because he's a wild child. I do think that maybe that relationship will come. I'm hopeful. He's an amazing guy. There's a big age gap here, 14 and 6, and he doesn't understand. On his last birthday, he said to me, would it have been, he's like, actually it was when Cooper was 12, he said, I don't want to turn 12. And I said, why? Why, you're turning however old, why don't you want to turn 12? And he said, because then I stop talking. Then I get autism. And so I had never thought that. That didn't even cross my mind. Start the conversations with the siblings. It is just as important as the conversations about this one. Winnie never thought we'd have a daughter or 4 children. We have figured it out. We're done. No more. She is amazing. She's my hardest. Did anyone know girls are hard? Wow. Someone could have warned me. I survived autism this one's going to break me. So she's amazing. She'll be 4 in May. And my husband, Jamie, I couldn't do what I do without him. Marriage is not easy. I'm not going to tell you that it is. And you'll see in a video that I'm going to share that we were actually divorced from each other and remarried back to each other. It's a beautiful love story where he says, I cannot divorce him twice. So now I'm more of a hostage at this point. Blink twice, right? Okay, and then my Facebook page, if you don't follow me, it's Finding Cooper's Voice. I share stories every day of our family. And they're not exceptional stories. They're not us, traveling or doing amazing things. We're just living our life. And the stories that I share are Cooper learning how to buckle his seatbelt, or trying a new food, or us being able to have success in the community, the things that challenge so many of our families. So I would love if you joined me over there. I'm often asked why I started sharing. Why did I start doing this? Honestly, the first reason was to find other families like mine. I think isolation is the hardest part of the diagnosis. Now, I didn't think that in the beginning because I didn't have the words to formulate that. It's the isolation. It's the not being able to leave your house. It's the no one understanding what's going on in your life. It's sharing stories and getting blank stares and people not understanding aggression and sleep deprivation and loneliness and anger and jealousy and all the parts. So I just wanted to find other families like mine, but I really wanted to find a dad for Jamie to connect with, and that's taken time. I wanted to find other siblings for Sawyer. And so if you follow me, you see that we're always doing activities in the community through my group called Coop's Troops. And yes, they're for Cooper, but really they're for the siblings. Sawyer's made friends with other kids that are going through the exact same thing. It's so vital. And then I wanted to find one other non-speaking child, and that took a long time. I found them now, but it was so important to me to know that we were not. Did anyone else ever feel like you were the only one? I mean, that's a lonely road. As time went on, I wanted to create a safe space for families of children and teens to share, just to laugh, to cry, to celebrate your kid drinking from a cup for the first time. Cooper was 6. I was so excited. to say that this is hard, to say that I'm jealous that everyone gets to go on spring break and we can't. I just wanted you all to have a place to say that and not be yelled at or shamed or told that you shouldn't feel that way, because who does that help, right? Now I want to help caregivers in crisis. I'm going to get into this in the meat of my presentation, but at my lowest point, I was on my bathroom floor and I refused to get up. I said, I cannot do this anymore. There's no help. We're going to just die alone here. No one's even going to know we're missing. I don't want any mom or dad to ever feel like that. And you don't have to. The world has changed from when Shirley's son was diagnosed. It's different now. There's so many of us out here walking very similar paths. It's hard to find us because we're slippery, but you got to find us. And then lastly, I want to shatter stigmas. So when Cooper was 2, people were really nice when he had a hard time. Now that he's this tall, people aren't nice anymore. And so often when I speak to social workers, I'll say this sentence: people are not nice to people with disabilities. And they get prickly. They get mad at me. They're like, yes, people are nice. No, they're not always. And the fear of going in the community is, the second part of isolation. We're scared, right? And so if I share Cooper rocking his life, I hope that people can think when they see a young man or woman with noise-canceling headphones on or flapping their arms, they think, that's like that Cooper kid from Minnesota, and he's awesome. That's my hope. And I do think we're moving the needle. Those of you who have kids that are 30, 40, and up, I really do think we are moving it. So the book, never planned on writing it. Didn't cross my mind. I love writing, but I didn't have time, as I'm sure a lot of you can relate to. And an agent approached me online on my Facebook page, and I ended up, long story short, signing a contract with HarperCollins. And I signed it the weekend in March that the world shut down for COVID. I signed it. So in Minnesota, the emails that went out were that Sunday that stopped school. Do we all have PTSD? School, daycare, jobs, everything. I mean, they all stopped. ABA therapy. ABA therapy never takes a break. That ended. I was like, what the? And so I signed on Friday. I had 6 months to write 60,000 words, and I had never written a book before. And it's really hard. Don't let anyone tell you it's easy. They're lying. It's really hard. And so I had this office with these glass doors, and my husband would put a couch against it so the kids wouldn't come in, and Cooper would put his naked body up against the glass, beating on it, trying to get in, and I would scream, take the kids, and he's like, just write. And I was like, I don't feel inspired. It was so stressful. But it turned out absolutely beautiful. I didn't know if it would be read by 5 people or 5,000 or 50,000. It's resonated with so many people. But the one that surprises me the most, teachers. I wasn't expecting it to be so popular with teachers. I'm so thankful for that, because that's a conversation that we all need to be having with our educators. But also adult siblings that tell me now they understand what their mom went through. And that just breaks my heart. So I think about the people that it's helping. And then my next book, so if you've already read Forever Boy, please pre-order Autism Out Loud. This is coming out April 1, and I wrote it with Carrie and Adrian. Carrie has a 20-year-old son named Jack who has autism, and he is in a supported college program. And Adrian has Amos, who's 11. Very different autistic profiles, but our stories, they're all intertwining. They're all parallel. And we picked the name Autism Out Loud because Cooper and I have never blended in. I would give anything to just blend in anywhere we went, but we live out loud. And it's important to say that didn't come natural to me. I know I'm up here speaking, but I am an introvert, truly. And so when we're out and everyone's staring at us, it's taken me a lot of thick skin and armor to be able to navigate that. It didn't happen overnight. And I'll have these after, too, if you want to come see me. Okay, so I have, just sharing this, I have a support group called Coop's Troops. So when we came out of our hardest days, I always say those were ages 4 to 8, I wanted to start getting into the community, and I tried going to sensory-friendly events, and we still didn't fit in. I'm not sure if anyone can relate to that. I had the most challenged kid everywhere we went, and it felt like I was the only one laying on the ground with him while he was having a meltdown, and every other kid could do everything, which is fantastic. But I had this moment where I was like, we have no people. There's no one like us. So I created an event every month in person. And I'm telling you this, I know you're in California, but I'm telling you this, create events, start them. rent out a movie theater with, different things. There's so many things you can do. Meet at a park. Just get your kids out there. I have an event every month for families, and no one bats an eye when we're at a pool and Cooper takes off his swimsuit and throws it off the water slide. They're like, oh, there's Cooper. But it helps. It helps to not feel alone. And I also have, there's a virtual option too, so you can go to my Facebook page if you want to learn more about that. But find people. It's my message, find people. And then the More Than Project, I'm sharing this because we have a retreat coming up in San Antonio, Texas in May for female caregivers, and there's margarita carts. So there's a whole lot of programming and wonderful parts too, so you can come and sleep and do nothing, or you can come and do all the programming. But take a chance. Come alone. We had an event once, and a mom drove from Georgia. She drove from Georgia, and she said, no one understands what I'm going through. So you can find that on my website. It's findingcoopersvoice.com. We would love to have you. We'll welcome you with open arms. Okay, so after my book came out, I was able to meet with the Today Show and share our story. I'm just going to let them play this video so you can get a little context about our family if you don't know much about us.
So April is Autism Awareness Month, and the CDC says the developmental disability affects 1 in 44 children in the U.S., with boys 4 times more likely to be diagnosed than girls. Well, I recently spoke with one mother who is opening up about her son's journey and offering hope to other parents.
The second that I looked down at him when he was born, I just knew there was something about him. But as development went on, he met his physical milestones on time.
It was Kate Swenson's maternal instinct that saved her son Cooper. While doctors, therapists, and teachers told her some boys are just late bloomers, she felt that a clock was ticking.
No one would really take what we were seeing seriously, and I was starting to panic because early intervention is key. Like, I want to help him catch up.
According to experts, autism diagnosed before age 5, when the brain is still forming, gives a child the best chance for successful treatment. And Cooper was just shy of his 4th birthday. How did they diagnose him? I know there's a spectrum.
Yes, he's on the severe end of the spectrum. He's technically nonverbal, and he's smart, and he's funny, and he's loving. I honestly felt relief when they told me, because I was like, now we know.
The relief was short-lived as Kate and her husband Jamie realized their new normal was about to become a lifelong journey. Ooh. In her new book, Forever Boy, Kate writes about her son's invisible yet severe disability, one that made him look like every other child, but only on the outside. Once you got the diagnosis, what did you think your future would look like?
I remember sitting there like, okay, there has to be more. Tell me what to do now. No one would.
The struggles were often intense. Cooper didn't speak. He ran away. He banged his head and was aggressive because he couldn't communicate.
I really had some low points where we were dealing with those aggressions, and I was really lost.
When Cooper was 2, Kate found out she was pregnant. Her son Sawyer was born without autism. Did you have reservations about having other children?
We wanted more babies, and we didn't want to let this scare us to not having it. Buzz.
But life with Cooper, who now could not socialize or be outside of their immediate family, drew Kate to a breaking point.
It's just really hard.
She began sharing her struggles in online blogs and videos called Finding Cooper's Voice.
I just want him to be happy. And most of the time, that is enough. The secret world of autism is unbelievable.
Her raw and honest posts helped create a supportive community for other families with autistic children.
You just gotta keep trying, keep hoping, realistically hoping.
How do you find the strength and the motivation to keep trying so hard?
I was missing Cooper's life. I was missing it being sad. I was missing it waiting for this to get better. I was like, I have to change the way I look at this.
And with that realization came another seismic change in the Swenson family. Jamie and Kate divorced.
I really felt like I was carrying a lot by myself because while my husband was very hands-on, he was just a little bit behind in the autism acceptance, which is very common in couples. So I needed to do it alone.
After 2 years apart, Jamie and Kate remarried and added 2 more children to their family, a son, Harbor, who is 3, and a daughter, Winnie, who is 10 months.
Can I get that one more time?
Today, after years of intensive schooling, therapy, love, and very hard work, Cooper is an 11-year-old 5th grader now communicating with a tablet. And while it's not his actual voice, the words and phrases are sweet music to Kate's ears.
He's going to have this great life. He's going to do so many things, and I hope that the world can learn to see that those things matter too.
You know, everything kind of changed for her when she switched her mindset. Not like, how can we fix this, to how can, this is the situation, how do we help him grow?
And she said, and watch him live, as opposed to trying to get to some destination.
And that's what you worry, you know, when you have a child who's neurodiverse, you're trying to, I mean, you can take care of the now, but you're worried about the future. And you're not sure. But, you know, like Kate did, you got in there early, and you can have a great outcome.
Yeah, you certainly can.
Really
and she did share just an opened her heart in this original essay about autism on our website, today.com, and you can read more about her story there.
That was a great story. I love that she's become such an advocate.
I love the end of that presentation because it sounds like they know me. Like, thanks, Al. They did a beautiful job with that. I think a lot of times autism or even disability in the news can be toxic positive or just really sad, scary stuff. So I thought they did a great job putting that together to showcase our story. And my husband was my IT guy, and I'll tell you, he was sitting in front of me that whole video, and he had to get B-roll, and it was very stressful. I said the second meanest thing I've ever said to my family during this presentation here. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. This was our wedding day. This girl is a sophomore at the U in Minnesota, so if that provides how old we are. My mother-in-law said this sentence, "You were so young to go through what you did, you were just babies." And she just said it in a casual conversation, but it resonated so deeply with me. The second you have a child diagnosed with something, you're expected to be experts, right? And I still to this day have no idea what I'm doing. I mean, there's no one that's going to tell you what to do. Many will try. It's probably wrong. Right? But we were expected to be experts, and it was a lot of pressure on us. And you could even go back further and say the second that you notice that your baby isn't meeting milestones, you're expected to know what to do. And I didn't. And the stakes felt so high. It felt like we were making really big decisions with limited information and not knowing what to do. So I just want to recognize the pressure that's on these parents and with no or very little guidance. I'm often asked about my pregnancy with Cooper. He was my firstborn. I had a very typical pregnancy. This in your IEP meetings, do they say to you, tell us about your child's birth? The first time I was asked that, I was like, what do you want to know? He came out. He's here. I understand now. But very typical pregnancy, nothing out of the ordinary. Gained a bunch of weight. So excited to be a mom. We found out Cooper was a boy at 20 weeks. Named him Cooper after Dr. Cooper from Private Practice, if anyone remembers him. That's where the name came from. And my husband immediately went out and bought a baseball bat and a glove and got his UMD baseball jersey ready. He was a college pitcher. And so he had plans, right? Plans that he thought were going to happen, expectations that are not wrong. Expectations are not wrong. He thought that he would have a son that would do some of these things. And so, again, very typical pregnancy, very traumatic birth. And so I think it's because he was a giant 9-pound moose. Long labor. I was induced and was probably about 30 seconds away from emergency C-section, but I ended up having him vaginally, and he wasn't breathing. And so they immediately took him to the corner and started working on him. And you know how when you're on a plane and you watch the flight attendants to see if they panic? I was watching the doctors and the nurses, and no one was panicking, but it was a long time till I heard that cry. I mean, it felt like eternity. What was it really? I'm not sure. But very low APGAR scores, but by the time they handed him to me, he had perked up and he was perfect in every single way. Now, I did not have a crystal ball. I know nothing of the future. Autism was not a word in my vocabulary, but something was different with Cooper from the second he was born. And I don't know if any other moms can sort of nod at that. My other newborns, I wanted to have 3, immediately started nursing, snuggled in, were just content and happy. Cooper was sitting up with perfect head strength, just like pissed. He was like, what is this place? What now? And what's so funny about that is if we flash forward 14 years, the world doesn't make sense to Cooper. And I don't think Cooper makes sense to the world. It was very much a really wonderful foreshadowing for what we were going to look forward to. But it's just not instinctual to him what he was supposed to do. Babies start nursing. They start sleeping. He didn't do any of those things. Cooper has very severe apraxia, which obviously did not know at the time, so feeding was very challenging. He did not sleep longer than 45 minutes at a time until, close to age 3. Did not sleep through the night till 6. And then after that, for many years, our day started at 3 a.m. Anyone know those early morning wake-ups that just, you wonder for a second if the sun's going to rise? I put a sentence in this book talking about those early morning wake-ups and how there was no one to text. And I was so alone, and I would think, I'm like, what if the sun doesn't rise? What if the world's ending and no one knows? It was just so isolating in those moments. We talk very mean to ourselves in the middle of the night. I think that's when we're the hardest on ourselves. So Cooper was a absolutely adorable yet very challenging baby from the second he was born. I was so confident about being a mom. I had nannied my whole life, babysat, worked in schools. I was cocky. I was not scared at all. And he threw me for a loop. He was just so, honestly, again, not a doctor. No, nothing. But I could say Cooper had anxiety as a baby. It was just, he was so anxious all the time. He was crying in the car and crying at home and crying if he was moving, crying if he wasn't moving. And so I started asking for help right away. And so what do we tell parents, right? The professionals say, just ask for help. Where is it? Just ask for help, right? That's what we say to people. And so I started asking for help right away. And I was told from the very beginning, relax, you're a first-time mom. Has anyone else ever heard that? And it was like, okay, well, maybe it is me, right? And then I had a doctor say, you probably have postpartum depression, which isn't part of my story. It's a very important part of someone's story, but not mine. But I convinced myself that maybe I did because I wanted something to be wrong with me and not him. So I was like, maybe this is all me. Then as time went on, I was told, raise a finger. Some babies are just challenging. Boys are lazy late bloomers. Read to him more. Stop talking for him. You're just anticipating what he needs. You're doing everything for him. Put him in daycare. And then the scariest one, let's wait and see until he's 3 to worry. And when I spoke in Georgia last year, it's age 5. I spoke to a group of teachers, and the kindergarten teachers were saying that they have nonverbal children show up to the first day of kindergarten that have never had any intervention. I cannot imagine. Cooper never babbled, so I just can't imagine not having concerns at that point. A lot of these things, this is gaslighting. It's medical gaslighting is what it is. And now, what would a doctor have said to me when Cooper was 2 weeks old? Who knows? But Cooper probably could have been diagnosed with autism at 9 months old. He was just classic. But I just had this conversation with a friend the other day. It sort of felt like no one wanted to tell us the hard news. We lived in a very small town, very rural Minnesota. Our Dr. Westrom, I can still hear her. She put a hand on my shoulder and she said, some babies are just challenging and you got one. And I was like, that's not supposed to make me feel good. But it was, I had 2 best friends that had babies the exact same time, and Jamie's sister had a baby the exact same time. It was very obvious that Cooper was different, and we would line them up, on the floor, and I had the only one that was crying, the only one that couldn't do it. So those early years, they're heartbreaking. They're heartbreaking seeing something that you don't want to be true. Every single day I tell a mom or dad to trust their gut. Sometimes you have to make respectful noise. And remember that our children are just one of 100 for a doctor, or one of 500. We have to keep pushing. And I can say with certainty that I never get something I ask for Cooper the first time. You call 5 times or 10 or 15. Keep pushing. These kids are so worth it. The first time I heard autism, I was working for a big nonprofit in Duluth, Minnesota, which is almost to Canada for context. And we would get these lunch and learns where we could come out of work and listen to different groups talk about adoption or guardianship, different lines of service. And on this day, I didn't even know who the speaker was. She started talking about autism spectrum disorder. And Cooper was 18 months old or so, not babbling at all. Not sleeping, super rigid, not playing with any toys. The cards were aligning. And she started describing the signs of autism. And I had this fight or flight moment that it was so powerful. And I wanted to get out of the room. And so I thought I could do it quietly, but my chair had wheels on and I didn't realize it. And I stood and my chair crashed against the wall. So everyone turned in this room and stared at me. And I froze and I started crying. It just, I don't know what overcame me. It just the tears were falling. And no one knew I was crying. I ran to my office. I locked the door. I used to do all my Googling behind locked doors. And I Googled autism spectrum disorder. And what it brought up was these dark, grainy YouTube videos that shouldn't have been online of young adults having vulnerable situations. And I remember thinking, there's no way that this boy can have that, and I was terrified. And so from that day forward, I went over to the library. I worked right across the street from the library, and I would read books. Again, there was no book, there was no internet things, there was no blogs, there was no Facebook pages, there was none of that. I know it's 12 years ago. And the books weren't like this one. They weren't stories, they were clinical, like clinical journals and that sort of thing. And I would read about autism and ADHD, developmental delay, different syndromes. And I would just try and educate myself and figure out ways to help him until one day, time had passed, and I was sitting on the couch in the children's section of the library, and this group of kids came running in. And they climbed up on me, and they're like, "Are you the reader today?" And I was like, "No, how old are you?" And they were 3.5, and they were talking in full sentences. That was the exact moment. I'm telling you, Cooper couldn't have walked in there. He couldn't have sat. He couldn't have asked a question. He wouldn't even know what a reader was. And so that was the exact moment that I knew Cooper had autism. And I went back to my office, and I locked the door, and I called the one place in Minnesota that was diagnosing. It was 2.5 hours away, and it was called Fraser. And I called, and I made the appointment, and they told me it was a 9-month wait. But I felt two things. You know what they are? I felt relief, because in a way I thought, in 9 months, he'll be fine. I have the gift of time. I can teach him everything. We're doing speech, we're doing OT, early intervention. He'll be fine. But then the underlying worry, right, is we're wasting time. Why are we not helping this boy? And I just lived in this in-between conflicted space. I think it's harder to not know. It's harder to not know. 9 months came and went. Time to go to the appointment. We printed the address off in MapQuest. Does anyone remember MapQuest? 26 pages of ads. And my lovely husband that I love more than the world entered the wrong address in. And so we went to a different Fraser, and we were in the parking lot. And I called the one that we were supposed to be at, and they said, "We're not holding your appointment." And I said, "Listen here, Judy. You are holding the appointment because I have to have this appointment." I'm telling you, I was so terrified. I had to know. I couldn't live any longer not knowing. And so we ended up making it, and they put us in a small dark room, and they tried to get him to feed the baby doll and stack the blocks, all the same things that they always try to get our kids to do. And then in true Minnesota fashion, because we're the nicest people you'll ever meet, and we have this thing called the long goodbye. It takes 5 minutes to leave. I've actually started saying goodbye to you already. Just kidding. So they slap their legs, and they're like, "Well, we'll call you next week." And I was like, "What? What do you mean you'll call us next week?" And they said, "Oh, we have to tabulate all this information, and then we'll tell you our recommendations." And I looked at her, this 25-year-old girl, and I said, "We're not leaving. You have to tell me. I have to call my mom." Did anyone else feel like there was so much pressure to call people and tell them, and are we ready to tell them? And they said, level 3 severe nonverbal autism with a language impairment is what she said. And I felt this instant relief. I felt relief because now we know. And I thought that they were going to tell me exactly what to do. Did anyone else feel that way? Once we know, I'm like, they actually like had a folder. I talk about it in the books. They like slid it across the table, and I was like, this is it. This is it. It's going to be like 10 steps to get your child talking. I was like, finally, and I opened it, and it was like a pamphlet for the Autism Society or something. And I was like, I just need you to tell me what to do. And so we left, and it felt like everything was different. In the weirdest way, it felt like the child we brought in was different than the child we brought out, which isn't true. Cooper's Cooper. He's exactly who he's supposed to be. But it felt like this diagnosis was handed to us. And in a way, I was like, you keep that. We're good. Like, I don't want that, But it felt like a really big thing to put on such a little person's shoulders. And so we drove home. We had that 2.5-hour drive. And my husband and I joked about moving to Alaska. We're like, let's move to Alaska. No one will know that he's autistic there. We can live off the land and start this like holistic lifestyle. We had all these plans, fight or flight. I'll tell you, Cooper is the most flamboyantly happy autistic person you'll ever meet. He's not there. It doesn't matter if we call him red, green, blue, or yellow. He's autistic. So there was no outrunning that diagnosis, but I know we have those fight or flight moments at times. And so went home, and they called us 2 weeks later, and they said, they did make the phone call, and they said that they could treat him in this program called day treatment. Essentially, it was a daycare for kids with autism, because we all know there's no daycare for kids with autism. So we ended up moving. We moved 2.5 hours away, moved our whole family, put our house on Craigslist. It sold in a day, rented a moving van. This is how we do everything. If you follow the Swensons, we do a lot real fast. And we moved, and I don't know where Cooper would be today if we hadn't done that. My husband's still angry. He thought that was our forever home, so he's still mad. Okay, just a few pictures. I love sharing pictures. So our hardest years were ages 4 to 8. And I think it's because Cooper couldn't communicate. He had no communication. He had a speech device, but had no desire to use it. He was going through a lot of comorbidities that we didn't understand yet. So we had a lot of constipation issues, a lot of ear issues that are very common. We were constantly going to doctors. And my one thing is, if any person, professional, ever tells you, oh, that's just autism, get up and leave. I don't care if you waited a year for the appointment. If they're not going to treat your kid for who they are, get up and leave. And so we hit a lot of dead ends trying to help Cooper. And it was so frustrating because I was like, I'm an able-bodied person that can help this kid, and I can't help him. Did anyone else feel like that? Like no one would listen to me. He's struggling. And our world got really small. I worked full-time. I worked for PBS, actually, the TV station. I had to be in my chair 50 hours a week. I was divorced from my husband. I had 2 little kids. One that I was getting phone calls every day to come pick up because he was being behavioral or whatever was going on. Talk about the pressure. And he started to develop some really unsafe behaviors. He was a big eloper, running towards danger. Why are you running into traffic? Why are you running into lakes? Why are you doing these things? So scary. So we ended up putting 3 locks on our front door and our back door. We had to have 3 because he could get out with 2. Anyone relate to that? The one that finally did it was that $2 L-shaped lock that you put up real high that you can hardly not open yourself. Yeah, that's the only one that works, right? He can crack any password. We had alarms, we had cameras, we had fences. Our house became a prison. That's really what it felt like. And I had another son, I had Sawyer, who wanted to bike and go to parks and play outside, and he couldn't, because how do I keep Cooper safe? I carry a lot of guilt with Sawyer. I have goosebumps just talking about it. Still to this day, I can't really let myself go back there because I worry that I failed him. By trying to keep Cooper alive, I failed Sawyer. I don't know if that's true. I hope he doesn't end up on a therapist's couch someday talking about it. But a little bit about these pictures, because I love sharing pictures. So does anyone know what bed stripping is? Cooper was a bed stripper. Yeah. Still is. I'm 41 and I have to find my pillow every night. That's not fair. But he would strip off every piece of bedding off every bed in the house, then the mattress, then the box spring, and he would carry them throughout the house. It broke me. It broke me. I would just sleep on a mattress. I mean, I just cannot keep making these beds. We eventually found keypad locks, which made a big difference, but this was a really hard behavior. I felt really sad when his room ended up being just a mattress. Like, I had visions for his room. He loves trains. Why can't I have stuff in there? Why is it unsafe? It was just very hard. Cooper used to line up chairs, and in the weirdest way, I miss this. He would line up chairs throughout our house, and I'm sure you're wondering why we had so many chairs. I don't know. The 4 wooden ones were for the table, but the rest, we would hide them in the garage. We would hide them in the basement. He'd find them. He was like a little detective, and he'd find them and bring them and line them up throughout the house. No one could sit on them. Oh, no, you don't sit on them. You just look at them. That picture has a light in the back. We went through 1 full year where we couldn't have lights on in our house. He would break the light bulbs, so we got rid of those. I couldn't afford overhead lighting, so we lived with headlamps. And I smile about it now. And again, back to Sawyer, in this book, I asked him about the headlamp years. And I'm like, what's he going to say? And he's like, it was so cool. Remember we made those forts and stuff? And I was like, yes, it was cool. Yes, remember that part. Yes. We eventually couldn't have anything on the walls. He would take the frames off and break the glass. He loved pictures, so which leads us to this picture, this one. Cooper, we call it treasure collecting now, but he was a hoarder. And he would line up items and put them in. This is a mild one compared to what it was. We couldn't figure out where he was getting all the items. You know those tubs that your parents drop off at your house after you get married or move out? That's where he was finding it. Love letters to my ex-boyfriend. My fishing license from the 80s. I mean, I could find it all. And then the best part was when I would find pictures of other people. And I was like, who is this at Disney? Is that your therapist? Like, he was a stealer of photos. Just last week, I found a picture of someone at the Grand Ole Opry. And he loves pictures of my ex-boyfriend, Pete. So those are around the house everywhere, and it's become like part of the family. And Jamie's like, oh, there's Pete again. And I'm like, I know, it's so weird. One day, a teacher pulled me aside and said, Cooper brought some photos of you to school. And she like slid them across like contraband. And one was of me as a naughty nurse in college. One was me taking a beer bong out of a plastic flamingo. And I looked at her, I mean, they went on, and I looked at her and I was like, he likes to see me happy. Like, always check the backpack, friends. Always check the backpack. That's gotten better now. Cooper actually has a cupboard that he keeps, and he takes his stuff out and puts it back. I mean, you never think these things are going to get better. It did. And then this middle photo, this is just really wraps up those hardest years. I always say I'm Cooper's person. Is anyone else here someone's person? Near but far. So Cooper is always near but far. So he's in the room, but he wouldn't be right here. And in those early years, he needed me to be with him. So I spent a lot of time away from the rest of our family, which is back there. I don't know why. Too loud, too chaotic, whatever the reason was, that was valid. He needed me. A lot of weddings that when we could go to them in the basement of the church. Or I have memories of Christmas, of sitting in the car, watching Sawyer and our family opening up presents through a window. Cooper was watching Barney in the car, and I text Jamie and like, bring me a beer, please bring me a beer. And so, you know, the isolation is the hardest part. And I want to just have that conversation. And I know that so many of you still feel so alone. I get it, but find that person that you can text. Find them. It'll make the weight just a little bit lighter. So in my hardest days, I was very outwardly a happy person. I still am. And I was still a caregiver in crisis, and no one in my life had any idea. I had many friends and family members in my life. I share this because when we think of depression, when we think of someone in crisis, you don't think of me, right? You think of someone else. I was very much in crisis. I pushed everyone away. I stopped answering text messages. I stopped returning phone calls. I didn't want anyone to know how hard our life had gotten. I didn't want anyone to know how severe he was. I didn't want anyone to judge my parenting. I didn't want to explain our life to anybody. So I pushed everyone away. I became a martyr. I was the only person that could help Cooper. No one else could do it. So I'll just do it. But I also worked full time, and I had another baby. And I had a husband, and I became so consumed by autism, there was nothing else that I could talk about or think about besides getting Cooper talking and getting him better. I started to believe that I didn't deserve to be happy. Now, that's a true sentence. The story I'll tell you, I was maybe 6 months pregnant with my third. We had moved into a new neighborhood full of kids. Sawyer, the day we moved in, the doorbell rang, and 2 little boys came to the door and said, "Is there any kids that live here?" And Sawyer left and didn't come back for a year. I don't know where he went. Jamie left. He discovered garage beers with the neighbor dads. That's the thing in suburbia. Do you guys have that here? I don't know. They're gone. And I was alone, and Cooper was still entirely nonverbal at that time. And I had this moment where I was very pregnant, and I was sitting there with this boy, and I told myself, everyone's going to eventually leave, and it's just going to be me and him, and I can carry this alone. I'll do it. I want everyone else to have a good life. I'll do it. And I told myself, I don't need to be happy. I'll just be here. I was a homeowner, successful in my job. I just share that because we have to get this picture of what a person in crisis looks like out of our heads and know that it's people in this room. I was told, "You're so strong." Ugh. I was told, "You're so strong." I was, but I had no other choice. I had no other choice but to be strong. I completely lost myself, 100%. And I was isolated, and no one in my life had any idea. So I wonder sometimes, was I not telling people? Was I not sharing it? Was it my fault? But how did no one see? I don't know. I think I have some resentment about that to my family and people. Why didn't anyone help me? I don't know. Isolation is the silent killer of families with special needs, and most of the world has no idea. We don't know what's going on in other people's homes. We don't know. And I just don't want anyone to feel that. When Cooper reached his hardest days, it was time for me to make a change. There was no more pretending autism was going away, but the change needed was not for Cooper this time, it was for me. And so I had my lowest point. I had a very viral video that is super polarizing. You either love me for it or you hate me for it, where I said autism is hard. And I didn't realize that autism was forever because no one ever told me. They always told me just focus on today, just get through today, and then get through tomorrow. But Cooper's growing up. Cooper's 14. Cooper has to live a long time without me. And no one talked about it. They didn't talk about these kids growing up. And so when I finally realized and hit my lowest point after my very viral video, I realized that I needed to change. I had to change the way that I look at this diagnosis. People often ask me to tell the story of when I realized it was time to make a change. I have lots, and lots of them are in Forever Boy, but one really important one. I was at Children's Hospital doing a sedated blood draw with Cooper. Sedated blood draws does not mean they're sedated. It means it's like 9 nurses holding down a wildcat trying to get blood. And we were having to do them all the time. And I was taking a break, and I was walking the halls, and I was pissed, and I was mad. I had to miss work again, and I was missing something with Sawyer, and it was so hard, and no one understands, and I was crying in this hallway. And I ended up walking, and I ended up on this floor where I heard the birthday song, Happy Birthday. And I turned and looked in this room, and it was a little girl in a bed with a handkerchief on her head. And she had cancer, and they were singing her happy birthday. And I froze, and I just stared at her. And I walked to the elevator, and I broke down, and I thought, what a jerk am I? I get to bring this boy home. I get to watch him grow up. Cooper's going to grow up. I get to love him forever. And I'll tell you, again, I have a best friend, and her daughter has an inoperable brain tumor. And I think about her every day and how I get Cooper. And I'm not lessening any of the challenges I'm going through or you're going through, but I'm so lucky that I get to love this boy for the rest of my life. I was missing Cooper's life. So I'm not sure if anyone else does this, but I was sitting in this place where I was like, I'll be happy when. And we do this in other areas. Like when I lose 30 pounds, I'll buy new clothes. I mean, we all say that, right? I had told myself when I lost weight, I'll get a tattoo. I finally just got it. But I was like, I'll be happy when he talks. I'll be happy when we find a school program. I'll be happy when we can travel. But what no one tells you is with some kids, those things might not happen. And it's okay to say that. That's not negative. But if I waited to be happy until we can finally go to Disney, I'm going to miss his whole life. I'm going to miss every second of it. And so I'm like, I have to change how I look at this. And this is true, and I'll be very vulnerable here. It never occurred to me that I had a choice in how I looked at my son's disability. When Cooper was diagnosed 11 years ago, and I said this earlier, it was presented as this sad thing to overcome. It was like, you don't want this. You want him like this. You don't want this hard part. And it was so depressing. Did anyone else feel that? Like, it was so doom and gloom that I didn't know I had a choice. I didn't know it could be any different until I figured it out. And I have a choice. I tried to be angry. I remember I'd have him at the shopping cart at Target and people would be staring at us and I'd be like combatively looking at people, just wanting someone to say something to me. Like, I want to fight you, let's go. But I wasn't good at it. I wasn't good at being angry. And it really robbed me of a lot of years. And Cooper is happy and he will do everything, and I will do, I'm gonna read that. My son's happy and he will do everything I can to give, and I will do everything I can to give him the beautiful life that he deserves. It's so important. And so this is my one cheesy slide. I choose joy. So every morning, I really do think of what happened the day before and try to find one small sliver of joy to pull out. Now, I'm not blowing smoke up your keister. There are really, really hard days. They're really, 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 really awful days. The last story I'll tell you before I wrap it up is we took our family on the pumpkin train in Minnesota. Cooper loves trains. We love pumpkins. And usually I research everything to like just the max to know like where are the exits? How long is the ride? Is there this, right? We're FBI detectives. My friend Rachel Flanagan, I'm gonna drop her name, who I love dearly, was like, it'll be great, let's just go. What I didn't know is they took you on the train and then left you for 3 hours at a hoedown with fire and bongo drums and no Wi-Fi. And so as the train pulled up and I looked at my hell, I thought about jumping in front of the train. And I said to Jamie, I was like, take a wife after me. I cannot do this. And so Cooper saw a bounce house. There were 2 of them. And I was like, what if he's too big? What if they make him get out every 5 minutes? What if he takes his clothes off? I mean, right? So we ended up like bribing the 14-year-old boy at the bounce house, and he stayed in the whole time. And so my husband and I had these like fights, like staring at each other without speaking. And at one point, we let the other 3 kids run wild. At one point, Sawyer was driving a tractor. Like this, so I think kids are survivors. I was like, have fun, stay away from the fire. But Cooper's 2-to-1. He's 2-to-1 in the community. And so it gets worse from there. He laid on the train tracks, true story, when the train was taking a long time. It was just a terrible, terrible, no good day. Huge fight, still mad at Rachel. It's been 2 years. And, but I'm telling you, the next morning, do you know what dawned on me? We did it. You guys, we did it. No one died. I mean, that is a really big thing. And that really sort of catapulted us into trying more things. We just took the Amtrak to Chicago. I mean, it was terrifying. The most scary part was getting in the cab. Cooper talked to someone selling drugs. He like sat next to him. And I was like, oh, hi, sir. But I mean, you just do. You just go and you just pray for grace, right? Okay, just some photos to end up with. I just want to just reiterate, we're happy. Life is hard. It's hard every single day. I am so scared for the future that sometimes I break down crying. I cried in the car a couple nights ago because I am so scared. I cannot leave this boy. I have to live forever. I cannot leave him on this earth without me. But we're happy. And so I want you to know that you can feel all these feelings at one time. Let them wash over you. Feel the fear, feel the anger, feel the jealousy, feel all of it. But remember that happiness has to win. Cooper loves arcades. We had no idea because we were too afraid to try. He plays the games. I don't know if he knows what he's doing, but he seriously on the motorcycle games he comes in first or second like every time. I'm like, this kid's a shark. Best friends, Peyton and Dexter, we went on a field trip. I always go with because I'm so scared and I'm a helicopter mom. But it was amazing. That's him in Miracle League. Sawyer is a really good baseball player, and watching Sawyer bat with these kids and run with these kids. Do you guys have adaptive sports here? It's the best thing we've ever done. It's not just for the child, it's for the siblings, it's for the mom and the dad, it's for the grandma and grandpa setting up their lawn chair, watching. Get your kids in adaptive activities so you can bring the family. That's Cooper and Peyton on the bus. We did a mock flight at the airport. We're not flying, but we did a mock flight. Oh my gosh, Cooper spent like $70 on candy and Jamie's head exploded. The best part. And this is us waiting for the bus. It's a beautiful life. Thank you all so much.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Charmy. My name is Dr. Temba Carr, and I am a licensed clinical psychologist, and I'm the manager of the Autism Discovery Institute at Rady Children's Hospital here in San Diego and beyond. I am also a member of the Rady Children's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council, a role that I hold very close to my heart, and also have the honor of being a faculty member of our local San Diego LEND. A lot of the volunteers today are LEND trainees, so yeah, oh, I see some former LEND trainees, hi. And so really grateful to be a part of this community and very honored to be invited to speak today. A little bit about myself, where I position, the lens that I'm coming from. I'm a cisgender female. I identify as Black and biracial. I grew up on the East Coast. This weather should feel normal to me, but I'm freezing. I was trained in large public universities and currently practice in a hospital-based outpatient setting. And I am deep in admin these days as a manager. So think about hospitals a lot. And I also want to acknowledge that the community in which I live and work, where we are today, was originally home to the Kumeyaay people for more than 10,000 years. My role as a clinical psychologist, and that's really the space that I'm speaking from today, but I think a lot about diagnostic labels. I am one of the clinicians, when I'm working with families, I am administering the comprehensive diagnostic evaluation. So that experience that so many of you have been through or maybe are waiting for. So I'm that person who ends up on at the end of the waiting list. In a pediatric setting, when I'm working with families, it's really working mostly with the parents and caregivers, and often in the context of providing an initial diagnosis of autism or another condition or profile. In my career, I was trained at the University of Michigan, and I worked with Kathy Lord, and so I spent a lot of time thinking about diagnostic assessment. And over the course of my career, there have been a lot of shifts in the constructs of autism. There's a big shift in the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And so this has impacted the way that I think about the job that I do, and also the impact that these changes have on families. The other lens that I'm going to be speaking from today was as a member of the Lancet Commission on autism in care and practice. That was a position I never would have thought I would have been in, to be a part of that commission, but the opportunity came. And it was the Lancet Commission that first put forward the term profound autism. So today I want to talk a little bit about that. How that unfolded after the commission. And the title of our talk today is The Move Toward Clarity. I don't know if we're there yet. I think we have a long ways to go, and I'm not sure that we'll get there. I think it's complex, and we'll talk about that. And these quotes here really kind of capture some of that complexity. Defining the boundaries of autism has always been a complex task. There are a lot of stakeholders, a lot of players. And we continue to have challenges in kind of parsing the spectrum to really identify the support needs of those who are on the spectrum. So let's talk about diagnostic labels. What's in a name? There's actually a lot in a name, especially in these different contexts in which we operate. When we think about the function of a diagnostic label in a scientific setting, researchers work very hard to identify behavioral patterns and study their underlying causes. And to do so effectively, we have to have labels. We have to have different groups that we can compare to each other so we can understand etiology, and so we can also understand, well, how well do the interventions that we develop, how well do they work? In a clinical setting, and this is, again, where I spend most of my time, diagnostic labels can bring understanding, an answer to a question that maybe someone was seeking. And it may be an answer like Kate spoke about earlier today. It may be an answer that maybe you knew at heart, but to have someone saying it officially can make a big difference. And it can lead to practical help, streamlined help, and advice. At the social level, a diagnostic label gives us words to use when we're talking to each other. The word autism and the different words we use to describe the autism spectrum have really evolved into not just a medical diagnosis, but often an identity. And there's a lot of space in between. Social labels can promote acceptance and awareness. They can also perpetuate stigma. I think both of those things can be very true in the autism community. At the administrative level, which again is where I spend a lot of my time, diagnostic labels drive allocation of resources, for better or good. I think that's probably at the heart of, I think, where some of the impetus for the term profound autism came from. Constructs of autism have changed so much over time, and I have this timeline up here. The top line kind of represents when the words autism started becoming a part of the vernacular, either in research or clinical or eventually community settings. We all know about Connor and Asperger's coming out in the 40s. And then in the 80s, then we start having autism being listed in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, or the DSM. So constructs have changed constantly with how autism is defined and how it's labeled. At the same time, there's been this interaction with community. So especially in the 50s, we see this upsurge of parent and caregiver advocacy, bringing voices to individuals with autism and advocating for their needs. And so we start seeing this intersection, and parents bringing a spotlight to what research needs to happen, and researchers responding, and kind of this continuing interaction. In the 2000s, especially during my career as a psychologist, we've also seen an upsurge in the voices of speaking autistic individuals. The neurodiversity movement, I think, has really become very prominent in social media and in popular culture, and this is a good thing, but it also has brought tension, and so that's kind of a little bit at what we're going to talk more about. But first, let's get into details about, well, what are we talking about with these DSM labels? The yellow column on your left really kind of represents the diagnostic labels we had for autism spectrum back in the 80s. In the mid-90s, that's when DSM-4 came out, and that's where we started working with the labels autistic disorder, the mouthful, PDD-NOS, Asperger's disorder, childhood disintegrative disorder, and Rett disorder. So a lot of the children who were diagnosed in the 90s received one of these. They didn't work so great. Across the US, across clinics, the diagnosis that you received was often more dependent on the clinic you went to or the particular provider you saw than maybe your innate profile or capabilities and strengths or challenges that you brought. So it was just not sure what's going to happen based on who you saw. And that wasn't working well. It wasn't working for research, and it wasn't working for clinical settings. And so DSM-5 made a move to, let's try to fix this. Let's get more standardized in our diagnosis of autism. And so that was where the move came to consolidate all the diagnoses under one, autism spectrum disorder. And this is the system we live with today. Some of the biggest changes in DSM-5 were the introductions of levels. And something that you might not know is that a lot of the other diagnoses in the DSM have severity levels. But how do we define severity in autism? How do you define severity in a condition in which individuals are so different from each other and have very different needs? And so the editors of the DSM said, well, you have to come up with something. And so the DSM-5 work group, they said, all right, we're going to put in some levels, but we're going to call it level of support. How many of you are familiar with the levels of support? Show of hands. Yes. How many of you have found them really helpful and useful and brought a lot of understanding? Not very many hands raising. I agree. They're kind of confusing and they get misused a lot. There were good intentions. The intention was to communicate how much support a person needs at a time in their life. I think the impact is that we really use these levels and think of it more as a proxy for severity, and that doesn't make sense. So enter the Lancet Commission. The Lancet Commission, it was commissioned by the Lancet Medical Journal to bring together a group of individuals all involved in the autism community to write a really big paper on the current status and the future of care and clinical research in autism. I got really lucky and got to be a part of this. Sometimes I still can't believe this. So this is me. I'm back here. I was sitting right here, but then we had to go back here for the picture. And this is Kathy Lord. She was my graduate mentor. And she's the chair of the Lancet Commission, along with Tony Charman, who's sitting next to her. And they were tasked with inviting people to participate in this group. And their goal was to have an international group and to have individuals all committed to the field of autism, but with very different roles. And so who did we end up with? We had representatives from multiple countries, the US, Canada, South Africa, Norway, Australia, India, and different walks of life. So researchers, clinicians, physicians, activists, parents of autistic individuals and autistic individuals. And these categories are not mutually exclusive. So there were really a lot of different viewpoints, definitely skewed towards those in academia, but also they made an effort to bring the viewpoint of those like myself. I've been really academic adjacent, but I'm really working in community and wanted to bring my viewpoint as well. So why did the Lancet Commission think about putting out the term profound autism? There were multiple reasons, and the commission didn't come together with the plan to do this. What was interesting is that the Lancet editors, they tasked Kathy and Tony with come up with something bold. We really want this article to make a splash. So what can you put out there? And it was the commission working together who came up with a lot of different ideas that could be a part of this big paper. So it became clear early in the commission that we wanted to focus on research, but also research that could impact people right now. And it's not to dismiss neurobiological research or genetics research, but sometimes the outcomes of research like that don't actually make a difference in somebody's life right now. They bring a lot of understanding. And so the goal of the committee was, let's focus on putting some information out that can make an impact on how research it continues to be shaped or funded, and that makes a difference for families and individuals at this moment. So we thought about, well, let's tackle our diagnostic labels. The DSM-5 clinical specifiers, level of support with or without intellectual impairment, with or without language impairment. It's a mouthful, and they don't get used consistently or as they were intended. And so one of the goals of the commission was to introduce some different terms that might be more helpful, a shortcut, if you will, that would bring understanding of a person's ability level and what they need and what their life might be like. They wanted to acknowledge that individuals with autism and severe and profound intellectual disability have vastly different needs, and these are long-term care needs. This is different from someone who is verbally fluent, is attending school, or has a full-time job, and is able to care for themselves without depending on other people. These are individuals who are not able to advocate for themselves and really rely on family members, often fierce family members and advocates, to communicate their needs to policymakers, to the media, to medical professionals, and the scientific community. And unfortunately, this is a group of autistic individuals who are at risk of being marginalized. A lot of times these days when we think about someone with autism, the people who come to mind are those on TV shows, The Good Doctor, Atypical, and you know, those are individuals with autism. They don't represent everyone with autism. So what was the definition of profound autism? One takeaway is that it was put forth as an administrative term. What does that mean? I don't know. It's an administrative term. So it wasn't proposed to be a new diagnostic label. And then who is someone who would meet criteria for the administrative term of profound autism? These are individuals who require 24/7 access to an adult who can care for them or support them, not next to them all the time, but close by in case they need something. Individuals who are unable to be left completely alone at home or at school or at their day program. Individuals who aren't able to take care of their basic daily adaptive needs. And they had to think of a way of, okay, how are we going to define this a little further? And so they used the proxy of, well, let's conceptualize this as individuals with substantial intellectual disability, defined as maybe an IQ of 50 or less, or individuals with very limited language. And so thinking of this as the inability or limited ability to communicate to a stranger in a way that they would understand. So really kind of practical definition. There was a lot of talk about the word. Do we use profound? Do we use severe? Well, if you use those words, how do they translate across the globe? Do they have the same connotation? Well, do we define profound autism as with core characteristics of autism or other kind of co-occurring difficulties? Maybe or maybe not. And then again, the idea was not to put this forward as a diagnostic category or a new specifier, but really as a more usable term. It's much easier to say profound autism than say autism spectrum disorder with intellectual impairment, with language impairment. That's just a big mouthful. I didn't even get to the levels. Behind the scenes on the Lancet Commission was fascinating. So I'm here with all these people whose names I've seen on papers for years, watching them argue with each other and sometimes yell with each other. There was not 100% consensus about putting out profound autism. There were hours spent debating this and thinking about, well, what could the implications be? And a lot of the questions at the center of this were, well, who gets to speak for the autistic community? Some of the autistic individuals on the commission thought we should be the ones speaking. Some of the parents of autistic individuals on the commission thought, actually, we should be able to, speak too. And so, really kind of going back and forth. There's also a concern that putting forth a term of profound autism would marginalize those who have different needs or those who maybe don't have as many needs. There were concerns that maybe using a term like profound autism could be ableist. So just lots of debate. And we kept circling around, is this the big thing that we're putting out for the commission, or is it going to be something else? And it ended up being let's put this out there. The goal of including this in the commission was to start a conversation. It was to offer a term that would benefit people and families and clinicians, and that would spur better description and advocacy. The hope was that it would spotlight a population who is often underserved and doesn't get what they need when they need it. So how did it go? Well, there's been a lot more empirical research. There have been, I think in the first few years, and it's not that long since this came out, there have been studies looking at the prevalence of profound autism. So, all right, we've got this term, it's defined in a certain way. Well, now let's get out there, let's get into the research samples that we have, and let's see how many people out there would meet criteria for the term profound autism. So that's been happening in a lot of different settings, both in the US and internationally. There have also been empirical articles really elevating the voices of the caregivers of individuals with profound autism. So there have been some nice qualitative studies, and these families have been included in research. Sometimes families don't even have access to be invited to participate in research. So I think it's great that there is more research happening focused on this population. These are some quotes from an article by Clark and colleagues, and the article looked both at prevalence of profound autism, but also interviewed caregivers. And I think some of these selections really capture what maybe some of you in the room experience, and for me as a clinician, it helps give me more understanding. In terms of prevalence studies, like we are learning more about, well, what percentage of the autistic community may actually be described as having profound autism. And it really varies depending on the sample that's being studied. Some of these, I don't have a pointer, but these top two rows represent a couple US samples, I believe. And over here, you see in those two samples, 69% of the sample, or 70%, met criteria for, I'm parsing this out not as well as I wanted to. About 57%, about half of the population of these groups met criteria for profound autism. And when they looked at it by racial categories, found much higher prevalence in individuals who identified as BIPOC. What's interesting about that is, you might take a statistic like that and think, oh, like there are more Black individuals with profound autism, but you also have to think about access to clinics. And so I think what this is capturing is really more of an ascertainment bias again. The range of the prevalence of profound autism across these samples went from about 11%, again, all the way up to 57%. So these individuals are out there, and they're a big part of this community. Since the term came out a few years ago, there has definitely been more conversation. And at times, it has been controversial. Lots of editorials, lots of articles, lots of features on social media, and even some kind of nasty exchanges at some research conventions. And this was not the intention. We wanted conversation, but maybe not in this way. I think there is, again, tension in going back to those original questions, like who gets to speak for the autistic community? Is the community a monolith? No, there are different needs for different individuals on the spectrum. Kind of two different perspectives that have come out, or concerns, would be, well, what if this goes too far? What if having the term profound autism results in service providers who aren't giving services to those who maybe have lower support needs? And a lot of, some who spoke for autistic advocates really indicated that we want to push back against this because we think these functioning labels are unhelpful. From the voices of parents, again, it's no, this term is helpful. This helps us. This helps bring understanding, and this helps bring us the supports that we need. So there was criticism, there was embracement, and there was also pushback. And really, a lot of that was well-deserved. The Lancet definition was pretty vague. It was, left a lot of room for interpretation from the person using the term. It wasn't defined by actual characteristics of autism. It was defined by cognitive and language skills, which are not core autistic traits. They really didn't give us any guidance on how we use this in relation to existing labels and eligibility criteria. Really left us in the lurch there. And then raised the question of, well, does this mean that those without profound autism, so without very minimal language skills or low IQ scores, that those without those profiles can't have profound needs at different times in their life? So what do we do with this? I don't know. I think we always have to think about context. So going back to the categories from before, we have to think about what is the context in which these labels are being used. The research community, the scientific community continues to need to have labels. We need standardized, consistent ways to think about categories of people so that we can study causes or relationships or interventions. At the clinical level, I personally have found it helpful to have the word profound autism in my toolbox. It's something that I can say that is not as much of a mouthful as with or without intellectual impairment. I think it is something that I want parents to hear if, with the information that I have at the time, this might be the trajectory for their child. At the social level, I think is where we've had kind of the most controversy. And at the administrative level, I don't know. In my work, which is mostly in a pediatric setting, I don't think I have seen how the label of profound autism is impacting access to services in adulthood. I'll have to learn that from some of you all today. But I think, again, we just have to think about context and the weight of the words that we use and how they impact how we kind of interface these different domains that we're in. And there might not be a clear answer. There are really conflicting values and conflicting needs across the autism community. I think we need to keep working. Next steps at the scientific level, continue the research characterizing the needs of individuals with different profiles. Invite and include individuals with profound autism to be included in research studies. At the clinical level, we as psychologists or physicians providing diagnoses, we need to apply labels responsibly and ethically. The guidelines for talking about profound autism is we shouldn't be having this conversation before a minimum of 8 years old. We don't have glass ball or crystal balls. We can't make predictions when children are toddlers. And we need to explain these labels to the caregivers that we work with. That is the role of our job, and we don't always do it well, but it's important that we try. At the social level, I think it's critical that we keep having these conversations about autism as a medical diagnosis, autism as a social identity. I think both things are helpful. We have to be able to hold both things at the same time. And at the administrative level, I sure wish that we could have systems that just get people what they need when they need them. We need better systems of care, and the hope is that continued clarification in labels can help us do that, but it's risky. I think we all understand that and experience that. At the end of the day, we can't forget that the group of people with profound autism have high support needs, and their caregivers are the ones carrying that burden, like we heard from Kate earlier today, and like you might hear some from our next speaker. We need great advocacy, and this is a group that right now is not getting what they need. And so if using the term profound autism is something that helps improve that, then we should continue to use it in the context in which it's meaningful. All right, I'll end there. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much to Shirley and team for having me. I'm really happy to be here. My name is Jill Escher, and I wear several hats in the autism world. I'm a private philanthropist who is really interested in autism research. We fund quite a bit of autism research. I'm president of the National Council on Severe Autism. We debuted in 2019, and this is an organization that was created by parents and practitioners who were really concerned about how lost the voices of our severe autism families were becoming in the advocacy and policy world, and we wanted to become a louder voice to advocate for the needs of our children. We just saw enormous and growing needs in our community and that weren't being represented among the mainstream autism advocacy organizations. I'm also past president. I'm still on the board. I'm board secretary of Autism Society San Francisco Bay Area, so I love being with my counterparts here today. And I'm also a housing provider for adults with autism. We've been in business about 17 years. And our adults with autism live in Santa Cruz, California. Finally, most importantly, I'm the mom of 2 kids with profound nonverbal autism. There's Sophie, who is right back there, being an absolute angel. She's 18. And then here's Johnny, who turns 26 in 2 days. And he also has idiopathic profound autism. He, however, would not last 1/2 of a second in this room. Unlike Sophie, who my friend calls portable autism, Johnny is not portable. So I want to start off kind of talking about context. Here we're talking about labels. What labels do we need? What's useful? What's not? A little bit of context here. Here is California, because we're here in California, our Department of Developmental Services autism caseload since 1989. And in fact, this is a little bit old. The cases have surpassed 200,000 as of September of last year. So we've gone from about 3,000 cases to 200,000 cases of autism. And this is probably what's happening across the country. It's just that California has great data through its DDS that other states don't have. And I just want to say, no one really knows what's going on, right? We've had this huge explosion in autism cases, and no, it's not all better awareness, and no, it's not all expanding diagnostics. That could explain some of it. Certainly not explaining it in the DDS, where we haven't seen evidence for diagnostic shift or broadening criteria to explain this phenomenon. But here we are, and we're confused. I want to say that, everyone in the field is confused and baffled and befuddled, not really sure what to make of all of this. So we're kind of grasping at straws, and I feel like as a community, we need to have some humility as we move forward, knowing that we have more questions unanswered than have been answered. So, as I said, no one really knows what's going on, but now we know, at least according to the latest CDC survey, that more than 3% of U.S. kids now have autism. That's an enormous population, really much bigger than most other pediatric infirmities. And here in San Diego County, according to the latest CDC, we're going to have new numbers in March this year. But last round, it was 4.5% of 8-year-olds and 4.6% of 4-year-olds. Now, that may be because you guys have great diagnosticians here, like Temba and other people, and maybe it's real, maybe it's a mixture, but that's a very high number. So professionals are grasping to make sense of all of these very diverse mental and behavioral impairments with really very limited semantic tools. They're doing their best, I think. So conceptions keep changing, and they'll continue to change. So my view, and this is absolutely following on what you just heard, is very pragmatic. We need terms that do work, They need to work for us, okay? We don't need terms to be poetry, right? We need them to help us. So we need to find terms that help us find the right answers regarding causation, which is mostly still unsolved. We need words that help us understand the biological underpinnings, especially the neurobiological underpinnings. We need words that help us understand the prevalence, right? When I say more than 3% of kids have autism, you guys are like, well, what does that really mean? Is it like, kids who are just a little quirky, or does it mean, kids like Cooper? Or what percentage? Like, it's very mushy. We need terms really that help us connect our children to the treatments that will help them most. What will help my kid Sophie will be very different than what will help my kid Johnny, et cetera, et cetera. And similarly, what terms help connect people to the appropriate services and the best outcomes? What terms help clarify various realities in the public consciousness? That helps as well, as we just heard before. So just, again, to put it into context a little bit, when you look at the CDC numbers, and this is from the ADDM, which is the every 2-year prevalence study, most recently we saw that autism with intellectual disability was 35%, borderline ID, 71 to 85 IQ, about 23%, and above, 85 or above, 42%. And so autism, profound autism really is probably just a portion of the ID, because profound autism is about 27% in prevalence. So you have a lot of people who have some very significant impairments who are not included in the profound autism definition. So again, I feel like we're kind of singing the same song. Context is really important, right? We don't use the same terms in every context for everything that we do. So, for example, I feel like, the terms around neurodiversity, the terms that might be a little bit euphemistic, those definitely have a place. I'm not for scrapping, all those words, that help us in certain contexts. For example, I said I'm on the board of Autism Society San Francisco Bay Area. Well, I help put on 85 events a year for our autism community, right? I'm not going to use clinical terms when I do that. I'm going to use, terms that make people feel, valued and included. I want to be positive because these are supposed to be positive events for families in our community. And I'm happy to do so because that's an important thing in the world. On the other hand, when I'm writing a scientific article, and these are some of the articles that I've authored or co-authored, and I'm talking about scientific matters such as autism's etiology, such as autism's prevalence, such as treatment needs, such as long-term care needs, I'm going to use a different set of terms. And I think this is normal, right? This happens everywhere in the world. And I think what we really don't need is to be dogmatic. And what I bristle against in the autism world is dogmatism I sometimes see from certain corners. Like, we can only speak one way. We can only see things one way. I'm like, no, that's not useful to me. So to kind of compare where we are with autism to another set of impairments, which is cancer. So I can stand up here and talk about cancer, which is a broad umbrella term, and sometimes it's helpful just to talk about cancer broadly. Like, I went to a cancer walk recently, right? I'm like, well, that's fine. I want to support those people. But however, if I'm in a treatment context, I probably don't just want to be talking about cancer because it's meaningless, right? I want to be talking about retinoblastoma, or I want to be talking about Ewing sarcoma, or I want to be talking about, I can't even say it, myodysplastic myoproliferative neoplasms. I mean, so, but we are so far from this in autism. And it is my hope that for, again, pragmatic purposes, that we actually do get here with autism. That, when you go to a clinician, they're like, oh, okay, this isn't just autism, like this isn't just cancer. This is a certain thing that could benefit from XYZ treatment, right? Or that we can see longitudinally will have these kinds of outcomes, right? We see this already a little bit, right, with the genetic disorders that are pretty prevalent in autism, right, where clinicians can more or less do that. But with the rest of the autisms, that's been pretty hard. So, from a kind of broader social view, what does it even mean when we say someone has autism? Well, today it's really a complete and total mess. Does it mean, he has no friends, or like my good friend Ryan, that he's incredibly social? Does it mean, he has an IQ of 30, which is kind of where my son is, or an IQ of 120? Does it mean he's highly verbal? Does it mean he's nonverbal? Does it mean he can't even make it through preschool, like my own kids? Or is he doing, sophisticated, well-edited TikToks with sound effects? Does he have no behaviors, or is he screaming, eating nails, and fecal smearing? I mean, it's insane, right, that we have one term that can encompass such a wide variety of realities. So the term tells us very little, and so the question today, or one of the questions today, is, does profound autism add some clarity? I won't go over this because Dr. Carr already did this. But as she said, the introduction of this administrative term has come under attack from some corners. This is just one example. It's by Steve Catt, and he makes some arguments that it's reductionist, it's simplistic, that there's a risk of underestimation of people who meet the definition, of false and might give a false impression that these people can't self-advocate. It sort of undermines the causes of unity, strength in numbers, and it promotes segregation. There's a risk of service losses to non-profound cases. So those were his arguments. I don't agree with that. I feel like it's not actually reductionist or simplistic. It's a pretty broad, mushy term in and of itself, and it doesn't pretend to be the semantic answer for everything. Does it risk underestimation? I'm going to talk about this because I actually agree with him in one point, which I will get to in a minute. I don't believe it promotes segregation. It's like cancer, right? We're all under an umbrella, autism. The umbrella is still there. The umbrella is not going to go anywhere anytime soon. That's still there. We need more fine-grained detail under that definition. So I don't believe that. Risk of service losses to non-profound cases. I do have a comment on that. So here's where I do kind of agree. So I think profound autism is a useful term. I can say, when I say my daughter has autism, that's not nearly as precise as when I say my daughter has profound autism, right? That's a much more accurate term for what both of my kids have. I'm happy to have that term in my pocket. However, what I saw in the media alarmed me, because what they did is they talked about profound autism and non-profound autism, and they treated non-profound autism as if it were mild. And I thought that is a problem, because I don't want anyone to get the impression that non-profound autism equals mild. Now, it's not the fault of the Lancet Commission. They didn't do anything to feed that narrative. It's not the fault of really anybody, but it just showed me how easily people can misconstrue terms. So, non-profound autism is about 73% of the autism population, right? And it includes people with very disabling conditions, right? But that don't meet the criteria for profound autism. We have to keep that in mind as we move forward in creating new terminology. So I called up Dr. Lord, who we already talked about earlier, Dr. Carr's mentor, and she's a wonderful person. And I said to her, I think this is a problem that people are seeing non-profound autism as something kind of shoulder shruggy and trivial. She said it's absolutely the case that non-profound autism, it's not mild. You can have quite severe autism and not be in the profound category. So we talked about the vast middle of autism, And she agreed that those people, have gotten lost, at least in the media narrative. I don't think that's true in the clinical sense, and that the media did not get this story right. And she said, the Lancet report, they did not try to tackle a full-scale reconceptualization of autism, right? They took one step on a long road, and that was it. So, but what I feel is a little more concerning to me is that the people who are critiquing the word profound tend to be the same people who've been attacking language use in autism on many different fronts. So this concern about profound autism is not isolated. It's part of a bigger trend to restrict the language we use about autism. This is just one example of such a paper published in the scientific literature about this, Avoiding Ableist Language, Suggestions for Autism Researchers. And they suggest terms to avoid. For example, don't use the term challenging behavior. Don't use the term disruptive behavior, problem behavior. Don't use medicalized or deficit-based language, even though autism is defined by impairments, right? Autism is not defined by strengths. It's just not. It's not defined as a mere difference or a diversity. It's defined by clinically significant impairments. Avoid high or low functioning, avoid even the term severity or the term being at risk for ASD. Don't talk about the burden of autism. Don't talk about suffering from autism. Don't use the term comorbid conditions. Don't even use the term autism symptoms because apparently that's too medical-ish. Don't use the term treatment, psychopathology, discussions about economic impacts of autism. Don't talk about autism as a puzzle, even though clearly if there is any puzzle in public health today, it is definitely autism. Don't talk about autism as an epidemic, even though very clearly the autism rates have skyrocketed. So I'm definitely not in this camp, as you can tell. And some of us got together and responded not just to that paper, but to the growing trend to sanitize language around autism. We thought that we need more terms, more specificity, more truth-telling, even if it hurts. Again, that doesn't mean in all contexts, right? I'm not doing this in all contexts, but in the clinical, scientific, medical, treatment context, these things are important. So what do we say? We say no one should have the power to censor language to exclude the readily observable realities about autism. We need the push for neutral language robs the scientific community of the ability to describe with accuracy the day-to-day realities of people with autism, particularly those with profound autism. Scientists and clinicians must be able to use any scientifically accurate terms that are necessary to describe the wide range of autistic people they study and support. So that's where we landed. We found, just talking to people in the research community, that they greatly appreciated the fact that we published this and that we were saying this, because they said to us basically, we agree with you 100%, but we're not allowed to say that because they feel like they're going to get canceled, they're going to get in trouble if they come out swinging. So again, this thing about, ableist, if you use these words, if I use the word profound autism, for my beloved daughter, it's ableist. I tend to take the view that Eileen Lamb takes. She's a member of our NCSA board, and she's a really active blogger. I hope some of you have followed her. I see some heads nodding. She's an amazing person. And this is just from one of her many, many blog posts on this type of topic. She says, true ableism isn't in sharing the struggles tied to autism. It's in pretending those struggles don't exist. I share that view 100%. She says, ask yourself, does the reality of disability make you uncomfortable? Being intellectually disabled doesn't make a person less. Having level 3 autism doesn't make a person less. So I have a kind of inverse view of ableism, as a lot of the activists tend to have, and I share this view. So profound autism, what are some key successes? Well, it's defined in the literature, at least as an administrative term, if not as a diagnostic term. And now they're working on a new updated consensus definition of autism. So we'll see profound autism 2.0 coming out. We saw the CDC for the first time measure the prevalence of profound autism. Again, it's about 27%. Research specifically geared to profound autism is taking place. So again, segregating, but segregating in a good sense, that we're, i.e., in the service of learning, in the service of increasing our knowledge base, those with profound autism from non-profound. The Autism Cares Act, which passed just recently, it was reauthorized basically just recently. It very specifically recognizes the need to address the full range of functioning in the autism spectrum. That would include, of course, profound autism. Profound autism is now a fully recognized topic at the annual international research conference called INSAR. And it's also entered the common parlance. There's less erasure of severe disability when we have terms like this. So what's in the future? Will profound autism land in the DSM? I don't know. Will we see a tweaking instead of doing levels 1, 2, and 3? Will we see other terms introduced? I don't know. It's a difficult task. Will we see a return on the flip side of profound, right? On the other side of the spectrum, will we see a return of an Asperger's type of category, right? Why are we only paying attention, right, to kids like mine and not to, so many other people who are affected by autism, but are much higher functioning? I don't mind using that term. Are there other categories that will be introduced? ASD is just an outward manifestation of hidden neurobiological phenomena. Do we have any chance of actually achieving biologically based definitions? Right now, our definitions are completely behaviorally based. So in autism, at least, obviously, if you have a genetic disorder, that would be one biological marker. But will we move towards a more biological lens? I personally hope so, but that road's been slow. And then your thoughts. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Sorry, we're going to just grab some chairs so that we can be sitting up here and having a discussion. If folks have questions, there's a couple of mics in the two corners if you want to go stand over there. And then I think from our virtual audience, if you have any questions, those will come up here as well. So thank you to both of our speakers for some great information. And I know it provoked some thoughts for me, so hopefully we have some great questions from folks. I see Dr. Mishra is standing already. Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you so much.
And if it's specific to one of the speakers, great. Otherwise, if it's general, then that's fine too.
I think I initially was going to ask it after the first speaker, but I think it makes more sense. I'm glad I waited. So I'm a child psychiatrist. I work really close to the border. So I have over 10 years now working along the U.S.-Mexico border in Imperial County and here. And initially the term was difficult for me to wrap my head around it because I've seen for a long time the medical community uses vague terms to kind of not tell patients exactly what they're talking about. And this is another way. I can imagine a parent coming in for the first time and me talking about a diagnosis of autism, using the word profound autism is really going to be very unnerving for this person. So breaking it down into the mouthful that you were describing, I think, in the first talk, I think would be more helpful for that patient. The other piece that was maybe concerning is, unfortunately, these terms downstream now start getting used by health plans and people to kind of, more than including people, they start excluding people. So we start seeing patients with mild autism not even getting diagnosed with autism at times because they don't meet criteria for service. So I think that's some of my concerns about, so I appreciate the context of use discussion because I think that is going to be very critical to make sure as this is talked about more, the context of use becomes critical. Otherwise,
Okay, this mic is on. Yes, thank you. I share those concerns, and I think I also experience that on a daily, weekly basis. You know, a lot of the labels that we use in a medical or clinical or research context are taken and I think really misapplied in by health plans. I am incredibly frustrated when somebody working for a health plan is telling me, no, the patient or the client that you just spent, you know, a day with and you talk to their caregivers and you observe their child and you have your doctorate degree and have worked really hard to understand these issues, tells me like, no, we're not going to provide that care for this person. So I share that concern too. At the same time, I also think about when you're in the role of providing a diagnosis to a family, you know, we don't have much time at all. It's like you get one shot to explain something in a way that brings understanding, helps them understand what next steps are, and hopefully empowers and energizes them to take those next steps and follow recommendations. But I mean, that's an hour, and caregivers and parents need so much more time to process that kind of information. So there are times when I hedge on using terms like profound autism because I'm worried that it might paralyze a family based on what I know about them. I do try to meet families where they are and use terms that they're using at the moment in the hopes that that will empower them to take the next steps, but it doesn't always work that way.
I think what I'm hearing you say too is it may not be something that you introduce the first time you meet with a family, and you sometimes only meet with a family once, right? Mm-hmm. And so then it's also about how do we make sure that if that term is accurate for a child or a individual, that when the timing is right, that it's introduced to that family. You know, so who would be the person who would be the provider who would do that, right? And so that's kind of a larger question.
Yeah, and most of the time it's probably not going to be me in the role of a psychologist. It's probably going to be a service coordinator or a social worker. And so, you know, a lot of our health plans don't provide access to those individuals, and I think we need to do a much better job there.
Great, thank you. How about we go on this side?
Thank you. I really appreciate your brilliance in this topic of autism. I have two questions. One is, we don't concentrate on the etiology of autism, number one. Number two, this kind of knowledge and expertise must percolate into schools, principals, and teachers, and that is not happening. And even the kids who have autism, they're excluded from this discussion. They are like treated as they don't belong in this discussion. So how do we percolate this discussion, this knowledge into the schools so that the parents who are suffering from this get some relief? And also, these kids become solid citizens of the country. So I'm extremely concerned about this because we do not know the etiology of autism. And the word autism, how the word came about. It's not automatic behavior. Autism is, how did this word come about? What is the etiology? We have to get to the etiology. What is causing it? Until we get to that, how are we going to intellectually struggle with this? We're all struggling here. You are struggling. We are struggling. Kids are struggling. Schools are struggling. Parents are struggling. So we need to have an approach where this knowledge goes, this discussion goes into the schools with kids' participation, kids who are suffering from autism, whatever the spectrum is. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think what I'm hearing is how, you know, while we're all still struggling with understanding as much as we can about autism, how do we make sure that the information is out there, and you know, for providers, for schools, for other agencies? That's how I'm understanding the question.
Yeah,
I provided a handout. I don't know if you guys got it. I was a co-author on basically a chapter about profound autism. And this particular chapter was aimed at mostly pediatricians and other medical providers for youth to help them understand what is meant by profound autism and to really focus on the specific I guess, challenges and profiles that fall under profound autism. It's a little bit technical, but it is somewhere, so you can pick it up on your way out. But that's an example of us at NCSA trying to do better at educating people who are, care providers, people in the community about profound autism. In the schools, that's been definitely a challenge. I want to agree with you there. What I saw, at least with my own kids, they tried to take my kids and put them in some sort of general kind of special ed class, which they benefited from absolutely 0%. So, I feel like sometimes in the schools, they're more concerned about with what is more financially and operationally easy than with what the needs of the kids are. I'm sure people here have experienced that. So yeah, definitely terms like profound autism could help translate into more specialized settings that are appropriate, for their needs. And then finally, you talked about etiology, which is kind of a whole separate topic, really, and the need to better understand why, what is causing autism, what is causing the increase in autism. And that's my personal passion. Say what you like about our current kind of loopy administration, but we do have people in our new federal administration who are very interested in that topic and who don't trivialize it. So if I have a little bit of hope for the next 4 years, maybe we'll see more serious attention to that very vital question.
Thank you, Cheryl. Did you have anything to add, Tempa? No? Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you. First, I want to say thank you to the speakers. Both of your talks were fantastic. I really loved them. My name is Karen Pierce. I have been a professor at UCSD for many years. I've been studying autism for 30 years. I'm also the co-director of the Autism Center of Excellence. And I first want to say that we study the biology of autism. We want to understand what the causes are. And for years and years, we're seeing all this heterogeneity. Some children with autism have enlarged brains. Some don't have it as much. And we started instinctively moving towards bioinformatic approaches to cluster kids into different clusters. And we recently came out with a paper looking at brain cortical organoids, and we found, oh my gosh, these kids in cluster 1 have extremely large cortical volumes, and that maps onto profound. And suddenly, when the Lancet Commission paper came out, the light bulbs went on, and we're like, we can now identify these kids as profound autism, look at what's going on biologically with them, and how that's different from other kids who are less impacted. And it's just been amazing from a research perspective to have that license now to use that term. So it's just sort of a comment that it's been really great as a scientist to have that. But I wanted to also talk with Dr. Carr about the practicalities of having this kind of rigid idea about you can't use the term profound if somebody is under 8 years old. We haven't quite published a lot on it yet, but we have found that using our bioinformatic approaches, and you can subtype people and you find kids in this profound category and then you track them for a few years, they are still in the profound category. As you point out, they have different needs. I think maybe more funding should be put into not just research, but interventions. They should be different. But if we're afraid to say to anyone, okay, just because you're not, because you're 3, we can't use that term, it might be limiting. The child may not be getting what they need, right? The whole point is we want everyone to live to their full potential. That's what I want for myself. It's the same thing I want for my kids with autism. So I worry about being really rigid about this 8-year-old cutoff point. And I want to see what you guys thought about that.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and it's exciting that you're here, and yeah, I caught you in the crowd and was like, oh my gosh, okay. But I think that in my experience, when I've been part of research studies, that rigidity has felt a lot stronger. And I think I have carried that foundational education into my clinical practice. But I think in clinical practice, I don't feel as constrained by the language on an individual level. I do worry about like the results of my evaluation being challenged, and I want to make sure that I'm conducting an evaluation in an ethical way. And so I think most of the time with children under 8, the hesitancy for me in using strong terms is, maybe we didn't have a good testing day. I talk with parents a lot when I'm talking about your child scored and had a very low IQ score today, and I say, low scores can happen. It could be a deficit in the way that your child processes information that's going to persist through their life. It could be a delay that exists right now, and maybe they're going to catch up. And I'm like, or maybe it's just a kid who really did not want to be here with me today. And sometimes it's all of those things. So I think just the pressure is from, again, having like this one opportunity to work with a family and then give them a label that could have profound, pun intended, implications. And that's kind of some of the tension, at least for me individually. But I hear what you're saying, because I think sometimes we do feel afraid to make a mistake or say the wrong thing in the context of an evaluation, and it can have really negative implications, especially if it maybe whitewashes sort of the information that a family needs and sets them up for knowing that their child really may have severe deficits and they need to be ready for that.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's complicated, because I do believe labels sometimes have negative consequences. It's, I wish that you could impart the information, but not necessarily with like a label that could confer negative fallout for the child and for the family. But my feeling is maybe we have to think of a system where if a child falls into this category, potentially being profound, that maybe they need to get another evaluation within 4 or 5 months on a different day with a different provider. And if they're still consistently falling to that, then they probably need something special, and they probably need it pretty quickly. And I just worry that there's not going to get their needs met, this special group, because we're so afraid to say it. But I agree, labels can be powerful and not necessarily always in a good way. So it's tricky, but I have seen a lot of people say, no, because we study kids like 12 to 48 months, and we're kind of using pre-profound, trying to play around with terms, and some people are all for it because it helps us understand the biology extremely well, and then other people are like, you can't use that term because they're not 8. So I think it's something to think about, that rigid age point.
Yeah.
Thanks,
So
great.
For now, for those kind of cases, are you using the long thing that Dr. Carr talked about? So with intellectual impairment, with verbal impairment, level 3 support?
Speaking for adults and just kind of using the term profound or kind of most intensely impacted. We're just starting out to publish these studies. But I believe that in Dr. Crochet's brain organ paper, we use the term profound in that one.
I think the way I see one of the differences, at least with, and I agreed with you about the levels of support. It always, as a child psychiatrist, it confuses me, but I think there's a fluidity in terms of, a child can be level 3 support, and then 2 years later be level 2 support. It can vary, right? And I think though, when the phrase profound autism feels permanent, right? Like you wouldn't ever give that and then take it away. So I think that's where maybe that rigidity about the age is there, because there's that worry about, okay, this is permanent. So I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Well, I don't think 8 is a magic number. No. It just seemed to be exactly what you said. Trajectories tend to be a little unclear in young children. And we want to be optimistic about them. We want to leave possibilities open, and we don't want to mislabel people if we don't have to. So just talking to people like Dr. Lord and other people like Allison who are on the committee, it's just, again, it's a practical issue. My kids could have been, pretty much diagnosed with profound autism by the time they were 2. I really want to say that. But there are probably kids like them who had different trajectories. So, it's hedging bets.
Great. Let's go over here.
Good morning. Thank you. I'm a parent, so I do not have any clinical or medical psychological background, but I'm new at navigating this. My daughter's 6. She was diagnosed at 2, and I'm having a little bit of a difficult time in navigating education, in addition to, like this gentleman said earlier, unfortunately with funding and such, they're removing like behavioral therapists and such in the school system. I changed school systems altogether to get better support, because in the first school system where my daughter was supposed to receive quite a bit of support, they funneled her and just kind of, she doesn't need it, she's high functioning, she doesn't need it, even though her diagnoses and such, the evaluations said otherwise. So I'm trying to learn how to navigate now in her new school that has been supportive. How do we, as a parent, educate ourselves further to support our children and to navigate the school system in making sure that we are advocating appropriately, that we are speaking on behalf of our child's needs? Because my daughter currently does not qualify. She had her IEP removed because she doesn't qualify, but my other important piece that as I'm learning and trying to understand how children on the spectrum also have eating issues, right? And how that impacts their immune system, and my daughter just being sick consistently. And trying to have the physicians listen and do something about it, and they do not. And it's very frustrating because you know that there's, pardon me, it's difficult. I work in the medical field. I've worked here for many years. And I now work in higher education, so trying to understand kids from my child to higher education and piecing it all together. How do we help? Insurances, providers help us to actually give the care that our children need. I don't want to have, seeing her labs skyrocketing and seeing that there's something off and they're being dismissive of checking for immune system issues and things like that is very disheartening. And how do you navigate that as a parent? I am. I am the person, even for the students that I work for, I'm very passionate, and this is why it hurts. Because I don't do this for my child. I am on every single committee. I am in the school to advocate. I'm in the district every month. In the councils that I'm on, in the higher education, I speak up. I will make sound. I am not quiet, but I want to do it with education supporting me to do so. And this is why I'm here. This is my first time in one of these conferences. So thank you for sharing, but I just need some help.
I mean, you're asking, the most important question, right? Whether we're talking about help in treatment, therapeutic help in school, help where it even gets worse after they exit from school and need adult services, or what we're going to be talking about later, autism parents cannot die. What happens, when we're old and infirm? This is the question, right? That's on, the mind of every parent. And, there really are two answers to it. I mean, the first is I'm going to invoke Kate Swenson here, who said, oh, you don't ask once, you ask 12 times, And unfortunately, the way our system is set up is it's a game. I really want to stress that. Both the regional centers a game, regional center services are a game, school services are a game. It's a game, okay? It's not like they come to you with a silver platter saying, here are the services, la, and the angels sing, right? It's about being the squeaky wheel, and it sounds like you're already doing that. You're super involved. But it's about lawyering up. It's about filing appeals. It's about getting, going to Dr. Carr and getting another evaluation that really pinpoints, this is what my daughter needs, A, B, C, D, right? So that it's harder for them to fight back. It's all of those things. And it's unfortunate. Like, I wish the system was a little bit more helpful. But unfortunately, we have limited resources, and so it's a squeaky wheel game. Second of all, we do need systems change. We do. We have this rapidly growing population of kids with autism. I don't know why it's so hard for people to accept that reality and to always brush it off as like better awareness and all this stuff. We need to be doing more to address their lifespan needs starting in the schools. So that's really where I fight a lot of my battles, is on systems change. But in the meantime, all we have is game playing. And I wish there was an easier answer for you.
Did you want to add something?
Right away, because I advocate. I work for Saquon Reservation. When I came in, none of our students were getting any recognition of that. If you get denied an IEP, request a 504 in a
So thank you for that. I actually asked for a 504, and they said no.
They can't do that.
She said that thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you for that information. Have you met Shirley Fett, the conference planner?
No, I'm new to all this.
Okay. Meet Shirley Fett because she'll have more information for you. This is not a plug for my program, but it's kind of a plug for my program. Or call us at Smart Care Behavioral Health Consultative Services. Shirley works with me there. We can help, kind of specifically help you think through what you need to do for this. But a couple of general things. If you don't agree with the IEP assessment that was given for your child, you can ask for a second opinion. It's called an IEE, and I forget what that stands for, but you can ask for that, an independent evaluation. School educational evaluation. Thank you, Dr. Bowers. And the school has to do that. They won't tell you that because they don't want to have to pay for it, but they will have to do it. The other thing, and I get so frustrated when schools say this, if a child is not having academic issues, they don't qualify for an IEP. That's not true. My son is high IQ, autism, qualified for an IEP. It's not true. Even if he didn't even have behavioral concerns at school. It was all social concerns, and he qualified for an IEP. But you have to say that and tell them that and remind them of that. So those are the two things I was going to say. But find Shirley or call us. We have a table out there. So thank you. Thank you for that great question.
I just want to add to that, and you're asking just where can I go to get educated, and I think it's so wonderful that you're here today, and what an amazing forum for having these information shares. It goes in all directions, and so I hope you come back next year, and Shirley, I hope we're doing this again next year. But I also I want to comment on just the level of frustration that I hear and I feel, and we just don't have enough resources, and we all spin our wheels playing the game, and it is sad to me that we have to spend so much time strategizing and trying to find the loopholes in the system, and we also have to acknowledge that the system works disproportionately against different populations, different communities, and so sometimes you can have a voice and you have to speak even louder, or maybe if you speak louder, then you're dismissed even more because now you're being an angry person of color. So those are at play too, and we have to think about the intersectionality. But I hope that in coming together in forums like this, we are all being advocates, and in every one-to-one interaction we have, every meeting that you're in with people who have more power, just speaking up, and don't stop speaking up.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go over here.
Hi, my name's Gilman. I have a son with pronounced autism and high behavioral needs. When he was 2 years old, he was considered neurotypical. By 3, maybe he had autism, but he was certainly high functioning. At 11, he has profound autism and high behavioral needs 24/7. Initially, my wife really struggled with, did she do anything wrong during the pregnancy? And it haunted her for years. And I didn't know about it. I didn't know that she was carrying that burden. And we decided to get some genetic testing done on my son to find out his condition. And it turned out that on chromosome 14, the tail broke off. And he's missing 200 genes on chromosome 14. And then on another chromosome, he has duplications. And I went to Rady's, and we did the analysis, and they gave me a letter, and the letter said, we don't know anything. And it was just like I thought I had the grail, and I had no solutions other than it let my wife finally breathe. Because his conditions were de novo. They happened himself. His own genetics created it through split.
That's huge that it let your wife take a breath, though. So.
Thank God, yeah. She lives today, maybe because of that. So I just asked the question, do you see a day coming where every child has a full genome sequence so that we can start doing person-specific gene therapy for our children?
That might be a question for Dr. Pierce. Yes.
Only because I'm involved in the Spark study. We have a table out there. It's hosted by the Simon Foundation. Can you go to the mic, please? Because I don't hear you. I'm sorry. Thank you. That is a fantastic question. We do want to move towards personalized medicine for autism. I just want to make sure all the parents sort of understand the genetics landscape, where you found something that really was very enlightening about what is causing your child's symptoms. The truth is only 8% of children on the spectrum have a known genetic issue. And to be perfectly honest, a lot of times that genetic issue, you're not supposed to use the word mutation, but whatever, a mutation in the SHANK3 gene, a lot of typically developing kids have that too. So there's really not a huge amount that's actionable. Occasionally there are like P10 mutation that is linked with cancer. You want to know that, you want to get your kid screened, whatever. And the genetics research is amazing, but what we're finding in our center is that it's actually way more complicated. It's gene expression. So a lot of genes on a particular pathway are very often upregulated. There's like too much activity going on in particular genes, in the case of autism, that regulate how the brain grows, because actually a lot of kids with autism, the majority actually have brains when they're young that are larger than our brains. In frontal cortex, they have like 67% more neurons. That's maybe why some kids with autism are absolutely brilliant, but eventually it levels out and the neurons are actually smaller. But the issue with autism really is brain growth. Genetically, genes that turn on and that express, that regulate brain growth, are really what's going on with autism. Yes, sometimes you find a genetic issue, a genetic difference. You're not allowed to use the word mutation anymore. The genetic difference is actionable and it's great, but I don't want people thinking you're going to find it, because such a tiny percentage of kids have a known genetic cause in that way. It's more complicated, but we're doing that at our center right now, trying to figure this all out. But believe it or not, it's actually hard to get funding. We're one of the biggest autism labs in the country, and we have to fight tooth and nail to get this kinds of genetic funding. In fact, we've gotten like 21 percentile grants, 19 percentile grants that just don't get funded because NIMH is lukewarm on certain things. So it's frustrating, but that's the state of play right now.
Thank you. Sorry, can you go to the mic if you have a question? Thank you. Thank you so much. We'll go over to this side. Okay.
Sorry, hi. Is it on? Yes. Okay. This is my first fconference too, and I feel like a fish out of water because, I'll tell you a short story. My daughter's 23. When she was diagnosed, started at 18 months. The diagnosis that they gave her was severe developmental delay with mental retardation, ataxic diplegia, quadriplegic hypertonia that mimicked autism. They did not give her an autism diagnosis. California Children's Services told me when she was almost 3 years old that she did not qualify for California Children's Services because they gave her the diagnosis of cerebral palsy, but she had the wrong type of cerebral palsy to get services. So she would get better on her own eventually. So since she was 3 years old, we've muddled through the system with minimal physical therapy, minimal intervention. We were in the Fontana Unified School District, which is an excellent school district if you have special needs, thank God, because they have their own SELPA. So she got very good care with her special needs program, but she was not in the autism program. So we had no autism services, even though she has all the markers, the no eye contact, all of the rocking, all of the self-injury behaviors. She's nonverbal. She definitely needed more genetic testing than Kaiser was willing to give her. And we just had let's slap cerebral palsy on it and hope for the best. So we definitely, there's something else going on with her. They said she would never walk. They said don't hope for more than a 9-month-old. She walks with a rollator now. She definitely has nonverbal communication. She likes very complex humor, and she can communicate with you on a nonverbal level of an adult practically. She's a miracle. But we do not have a diagnosis of anything besides, we don't know what's going on. How do I correct that at this point? She's just in this state of precocious puberty where she doesn't have any kind of menstrual cycle at a 23-year-old. She's 88 pounds. And there is no diagnosis for her. I don't know where else to go. I'm just at this point of she is just an anomaly. And she's had endocrinological studies, we've had MRIs, we've had CAT scans, and we have nothing. Absolutely nothing, but I'd like to know what my little girl has. And I have 5 children, so I have 4 typically developing children, and she's the youngest. So it's like I have 4 control studies to show you that I can produce healthy babies. There was nothing going on with completely typical birth. She's my angel.
You had full genetic testing for her?
No, we had no full genetic testing. We had Kaiser genetic testing, which means they did like just the basic metabolic testing and genetic testing. They did it 18 months old, and that's all they did. And they went, we don't know.
I would start there. I mean, can you go to your clinician and just see?
I don't really know. I mean, we've got Medi-Cal. It's kind of what Medi-Cal does.
But it's like Jill says, it is more available now. In terms of genetic, at least kind of like the
it's hard
chromosome array.
It's hard because she's an adult, so it's kind of like that. What do they do now? Because it's kind of like, can you reevaluate her for autism? Can you put the genie back in the bottle?
You can still go
How
back
do
to
you do it?
regional center, and it's a lot for you to have to like collect all the records to show that she had these challenges before the age of 18.
Yeah.
But you could still go back to regional center and get that evaluation. And for an adult, that's actually where I would send somebody. I think it's going to be hard to find a clinical practice that would do testing for an adult. It's just not covered, unfortunately, by insurance. So that's why regional center is the place to go. It is the payer of last resort for a reason. So that's what I would recommend. But I think, to Jill's point, the genetic testing, it is more widely available now than when she was younger. So I think that it would be good to ask her primary care provider even for that. Okay, good luck. I know we're out of time, and I'm sorry. I know there might be other people who had questions. I know we have an hour and a half, I think, for lunch and to go check out the resource fair again. I don't know if these two are able to hang out if there's any kind of follow-up questions, but thank you all for being here.
PDA, public displays of affection? Sadly, no. And if that's what you're hoping for, you are in the wrong auditorium. PDA, pathological demand avoidance. All right, I feel like we're getting warmer. Let's try it one more time. PDA, persistent drive for autonomy. Yeah, I think that one sounds the best. PDA. These 3 little letters have been making quite the splash in the mental health and autism worlds recently. We have people walking through the doors of our mental health clinics on a daily basis saying, I did it. I found the missing puzzle piece. This is it. It's PDA. My child's PDA. My spouse is PDA. My boss is PDA. And people are really resonating with this. So today, we'll be talking about the topic of demand avoidance. Is it PDA? Is it something else? And what can we do to work with it most efficiently? So welcome, everyone. I'd like to also welcome to the stage my better half, Miranda Milliken. She is a marriage and family therapist. She's the co-owner and co-creator of Wander Psychotherapy, our bustling group practice that works with neurodivergent, gender diverse, and queer populations, respectively, here in San Diego. Miranda is autistic and ADHD herself. She and I are in a mixed neurotype relationship. We have a neurospicy kid who keeps us on our toes, and Miranda's current special interests are plants, parenting, body image, and the notorious Taylor Swift.
It's great to be here with you all today, and I recognize some faces from our last talk, so that's really nice to see you all again. This is Dr. Ruth Milliken. She's a licensed clinical psychologist. She does psychological testing and therapy at our practice Wander, and we work with a lot of PDA and neurodivergent folks. And her interests right now are psychology, boba, and what she says is playing with clay, but I would definitely say she is a clay artist.
All right, so this is a little bit about our agenda, so what you can expect from this presentation. First, we're going to go over some vocabulary words. So if you were in our session earlier, you are ahead of your peers, so congratulations. We're going to talk about what demand avoidance in general is, how it looks in PDA, and then what do we do about this? So first, the lingo. I said this earlier, so what is neurodiversity? It's the idea that the brain works differently for every person, and there's a spectrum to that, and that variability is a natural part of what you would expect in humans. It's like any other trait. So height, there's variability. Eye color, there's variability. Hair texture, anything. Even if we take eye color, for example, people with blue eyes, there's an incredible variability of even what the tone and brightness of blue eyes is. Neurodiversity is the same. So neuro is brain and diversity is different. So there's a natural range there. What is a neurotype? It's a cluster of traits and basically how your brain works. So autism is a neurotype. ADHD is a neurotype. And then neurotypical is a neurotype. So what does neurotypical mean? Like I said prior, there's more neurotypical people than there are neurodivergent people. We are in the majority, so we are categorizing that as typical. But really, I think neuromajority is a better phrase. So neurotypical people are not autistic. They're not ADHD that they know of. They're neurotypical. And then allistic is basically when you're not autistic, you're allistic. So that could be an ADHDer, it could be a neurotypical person. These are people who are not autistic themselves. And then PDA, that's why we're here. PDA right now stands for pathological demand avoidance. But like I said earlier, we prefer the phrase persistent drive for autonomy. The second you put the word pathology in something, it automatically stirs stigma. It automatically has people have assumptions about that person. So if I was PDA, I personally wouldn't want pathological right in the name. It's not helpful. So why are we here today, and why is this talk important? Well, I'll say, as Americans in the US, we are very behind other places in the world where PDA has been known and defined and worked with for years. PDA was actually recognized in the 80s in the UK by a British psychologist. So she was basically working with autistic children over the course of many years, and after a while she noticed there was a certain subset of those autistic children that had traits that were similar to each other, and she eventually recognized that as PDA. That was almost 50 years ago, so we are very behind. So it's really important that we have the conversation about what PDA is. If my child fits into this profile, what can I do about it? And if you haven't identified it, it's hard to work with it. So that's why we're here. So before we get into what PDA is, or pathological demand avoidance, we have to first talk about what demand avoidance is. So for everyone in the room, have you ever avoided a demand? Raise your hand. If your hand is not raised, you just avoided a demand, didn't you? So 10 out of 10, thank you. But avoiding a demand is natural. We all do this, and we all do it for lots of different reasons. We might avoid a demand because we're too tired, we don't have the spoons, I don't want to do that thing, I don't respect the person who's asking. There's a million different reasons why someone would avoid a demand, and this is completely natural, and we all do it. So how does this differ from PDA? So if any of you have ever been on the website Neurodivergent Insights, I highly recommend that you do. So Neurodivergent Insights is created and run by an autistic mental health provider. So I think that people with lived experience in the area should have the loudest voices in the room. So Dr. Neff creates a bunch of different graphics, and this is one of them. So her website is not specific to PDA, but they do have PDA content. So she shows that on the top of that iceberg, we have demand avoidance, the general topic. And down below, you have not all of them, many possibilities of what might lead to demand avoidance. So that can be anything. OCD triggers, sensory issues, perfectionism, and then right there in the center, we have PDA. So if we see someone or our child or interacting with someone who tends to avoid demands more persistently, we have to ask ourselves, what is leading to that? What is contributing to that? If you have someone, an autistic person, let's say, who has a lot of sensory issues, and like hearing loud noises is very hard for them. They have to wear noise-canceling headphones. And then you ask them to vacuum the living room, and they say, no, I can't do that. Technically, they avoided that demand, but the reason they avoided that demand was the sensory issues with autism. So always ask yourself, why is my child avoiding the demand? The reason matters. So what is PDA? So there is still some debate about this. So is PDA a standalone condition? Is PDA a sub-profile of autism? Is PDA some other amorphous thing that we don't know yet? I would say most experts in this area, and in our practice, we believe that PDA is a subprofile of autism. So basically what that means is this person meets the criteria for autism. They're an autistic person. They have those social differences, sensory differences, they might have special interests, they might STEM, they're autistic. Layered on top of that is this PDA profile. The hallmark of the PDA profile is when they're met with a demand of some kind or a perceived loss of autonomy, it is pushed back with extreme stress. It does not feel good. Their nervous system gets kicked up and kicked on, and it leads to them avoiding that demand. And this happens over and over and over again. That could be an external demand. It could be an internal demand, so even a demand they place on themselves. These things kick up their nervous system. It could be a small demand like brush your teeth, or it could be a big demand like talk to 200 people. It doesn't matter. It can be big or small. Some of the traits that we see come within this profile are a high need for control, high expression of jealousy, resistance of everyday demands, strong aversion to pressure, mood swings, sensory differences, difficulty apologizing. And then lastly, we've noticed that autistic people who meet the PDA profile, for whatever reason, tend to show less social differences than their peers. Like they appear maybe more neurotypical. And that could be because of masking, or it could be because of a lot of things, but the kids who tend to meet this profile on the outside might look a little bit more socially capable for whatever reasons. But these are kind of the cluster of things that you'll see within the autism community with kids who meet the profile for PDA. So you think about, like, say something like difficulty apologizing. It doesn't mean that the child's not sorry. It doesn't mean that they're not having remorse for what they did. It's the demand of apologize. That demand is very dysregulating, even if you ask them nicely. So I'm not sure if our daughter meets the profile of PDA, but she has lots of demand avoidance. And there are many times where in the past we may have encouraged her to apologize, but that's fruitless because if she does give the apology, you can tell she doesn't really want to do it, and it usually dysregulates her quite a bit. So when we took our foot off the gas, she would circle back an hour later and say sorry, very genuinely, because she was able to do it in her own time. So this is kind of the cluster of things that you might see. So what are examples of demands? Like I said, they can come in from the outside, or they can even be on the inside. So let's say your PDA child wakes up. Did they pick their wake up time? Absolutely not. You did. So waking up at a certain time, that's a demand. What do you want for breakfast? The question is a demand. And you're only giving them so many options. So forcing them to eat pancakes, that's a demand. Then you have to eat the pancakes, that's demand. What are you going to wear? Do you want to wear a dress or do you want to wear shorts? Demand. Put on your clothes. Demand. Brush your teeth. Demand. This kid's been up for 20 minutes. You can see how hard and how quickly these things build on each other. For the average person, let's say a neurotypical person, these are annoyances. We don't really want to do these things, but they don't have the same weight as they do for a PDA person. They don't have the same dysregulating effect. The nervous system isn't kicked on in the same way. So then they get to school, and they are completely disempowered. They are at the whim of their teachers. They tell them when they can eat, how long they have to sit at their desk, when they can go play, and they are totally not in control in those situations. So we see a lot of times when kids, PDA kids or neurodivergent kids, when they get home from school, they totally melt down and they lose it because they've been white-knuckling it all day long. And this is not specific to children. Say you have a PDA adult. You go to work, your boss tells you what to wear, what time you have to get there, when you can have your lunch, what your job duties are. Again, you're kind of in this one-down position where they're dictating you what happens, and it will have an effect.
Thank you, Ruth. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. So you can see the demands build up really quickly and the dysregulation builds up really quickly in these kids. And when that happens, their nervous system sort of have two ways of kind of coping with that level of dysregulation. There's masking and what's called equalizing behavior. And I'm going to talk a little bit about both. So how I think about PDA is sort of when there's a lot of demands or autonomy is being taken away, the kid kind of ends up in a one-down position where they feel less power, less control, and less regulation in their system. So equalizing is a behavior that's going to take them from here back to here. So, for example, maybe the kid's been at school all day and they've been getting demands all day and their systems are overwhelmed by not having control. Maybe when they get home, they're super controlling with their parents. You sit here, you sit there. Maybe they're controlling with their little sibling. Maybe they destroy their little sibling's art. So you're going to see maybe some aggressive behaviors could be equalizing.
but anything that PDA is trying to do to get back in control and back in regulation. And a lot of these things look like traditionally bad behavior, but they're just trying to get safe. So I think it's important to look at what's below the surface of a lot of these behaviors that you're going to see with PDAers when they're dysregulated. And there's going to be times when these kids can't equalize effectively. So there's going to be times where they're down here and they want to do an equalizing behavior to get back up here. But for example, in the school environment, they're not really able to do that. They're going to end up at the principal's office. They're going to, end up with the parents being called. And that actually pushes them further down because now they're being punished. So there's certain times where these kids cannot equalize to regain a sense of regulation. So they end up masking. And that's where we see kids that look very compliant at school because they are masking their PDA traits. And then they get home and they're equalizing like crazy. So we're almost seeing two different versions of the same child is a lot of the things that I hear from PDA parents. Compliant, sort of well-behaved at school, and then coming home and being very aggressive, very jealous, very controlling, and having a lot of emotional dysregulation. So masking also has a cost. The more the child masks at school and holds in the PDA, there is only so long you can do that for. And that goes for the autistic community in general. There's only so long you can mask before you start to, really have an effect of that. And we start to see more meltdowns and shutdowns. And I know there's a lot of autistic parents in the audience today, so I know that you guys probably already know what a meltdown looks like. But it can involve self-harm, it could involve crying, screaming, it could involve like harming someone else. So these meltdowns can be pretty intense. But also there can be what's called a shutdown, where someone just shuts in. You might not even know that they are having this much dysregulation because maybe they're just not talking, maybe they're isolating themselves and just kind of in a panic state, but kind of just internal. So the more demands, the more masking, the more meltdowns and shutdowns. So you see where this is heading. Burnout. So what does PDA burnout look like? Well, it looks a lot like autistic burnout, but a little bit different in some areas. So the first thing we're going to start to see is increased sensory issues. So PDAers have a baseline of sensory issues that they already experience, but they're going to get much worse as we go towards burnout. So I know for my daughter, one of the first things as we're sort of seeing her go towards burnout is she'll wake up and she'll just say, the sun is too bright. It's too bright. Even with all the shades down, it's too bright. And that's how usually we know, okay, we're teetering into burnout territory. Difficulty with self-care, so maybe not taking as many showers, as many baths, not brushing teeth, maybe toileting issues even with PDA, big potty training regressions, even in older kids, exhaustion, school withdrawal, so refusing to go to school, just unable to get out of bed, like extreme exhaustion and depression. Physical symptoms, so kids in general won't tell you how they're feeling. Oftentimes you're going to see it with stomach aches, headaches, my body won't work, my legs won't work, I feel pain in my body. That's just kind of how that might present, especially in a younger kid. And then no tolerance for demands. So PDAers can handle a certain amount of demand usually. It builds up quickly, but they can. But under PDA burnout, zero demands are really handled. Any demand of getting out of bed, of even eating, it can be pretty extreme, the amount of burnout that PDAers go into, and what that looks like can be very extreme and very scary for parents. So you're probably thinking this sounds really hard, or if you have a PDAer, you're going, this is so hard. But I wanted to take a minute and talk about the strengths of PDA kids, because PDAers are incredible, and they are incredible kids, and they're such an important part of our world. So PDAers are autodidactic, which means they can teach themselves pretty much anything they're interested in. And they don't like to learn in front of other people because that puts them in that one down position, but they'll do it on their own, they'll master something, and then they'll show you. And it's like remarkable what they can do. They don't give in to social pressure, so these aren't kids that you have to worry about like doing things just because their friends are doing them. They have such a strong sense of personal identity, and they're not people pleasers at all. They're incredibly honest. They're innovative problem solvers, so they have these amazing ideas about the world, and they really think outside of the box. They're creative. They know how to self-advocate. They have a strong emotional awareness too. They know what they feel, they know what they think, and they know how to communicate that. And that's something most of us in this room are still trying to figure out. So they're pretty amazing in that way. And they're very passionate about their interests. So these kids are incredible and have incredible strength. So some of you might know Greta. She is a climate change advocate, and she's come out as being autistic. I don't know that she has a PDA profile, but I'm assuming some things. But I wanted to talk about the evolutionary purpose of PDA, because I believe it has a purpose in our world. These kids know the power of no, and they don't just dissociate away from the world's problems the way most of us adults do. Maybe we know there's a war, maybe we know there's school shootings, maybe we know there's all these terrible things happening, but we still show up to work, we parent, we kind of healthfully dissociate away from those things in some ways. But PDAers don't dissociate away from what's wrong. They say no. They are the whistleblowers of our society saying, absolutely not. And I think Greta really fits that. She's not going to just go along with things just as they are. She's going to say, no, this is not okay. And I think PDAers are kind of pushing up against so many things that are wrong in the world. So we wouldn't want to get rid of PDA. We wouldn't want for PDAers not to be here because they serve such an incredible purpose.
All right, this is a quote from one of our wonderful PDA teens. He says, "It's like the weight of the world is on my shoulders, or I'm walking in sand. It's a simple request. I want to do it, but my system says, no, as a child would." All right, so once PDA is identified, what should we do next? Before we move on to the what do we do next part, I want to talk to you guys about how PDA is identified. So like I said, to meet the PDA profile, you have to first be identified as autistic. So how do we get identified as autistic? Well, there's different avenues for that. Maybe a pediatrician might say, based on what I'm seeing developmentally or different traits, I feel like it's possible your child is autistic. So that's one option. Your child could see a therapist, and through that relationship, the therapist could say, I'm seeing a lot of traits of autism. I'm going to give the clinical diagnosis of this is an autistic person. Or you could have formal psychological testing. I want to also highlight the point that not everyone has access to all of these things. There's a huge disparity of people who have, say, limited financial resources or different minority groups who will not have access to good psychological testing. And even when they do, there's a lot of misperception of how autism shows up in, say, girls. How does autism show up in minority groups? And there's a lot of missed cases, unfortunately, because of not enough knowledge. So once the child is identified as autistic, how do we get that PDA part? Well, you have to find someone who specializes in that. So the mental health, so in general, we are way behind when it comes to PDA. Even the mental health field, in our field, we are, as a whole, incredibly well behind as it comes to PDA. So we use a book called the DSM-5, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, and it basically lists every mental health diagnosis and every type of neurodivergence, and there's criteria for it. You can flip through those pages, but you will not find PDA in that book. Now, fingers crossed, we'll see PDA in DSM-6, maybe DSM-7, DSM-8. I don't know how long it's going to take for us to catch up, but it's not in there. So right now, clinical psychologists can't even diagnose PDA because it's not in that book. So if you are wanting this type of testing, when you meet the evaluator, you have to ask them, what is your understanding of PDA? How would you test for that? How would you consider culture in this? How would you consider the fact that my child has lower support needs? And if they can't answer those questions, you're going to have to find someone else because your child will be missed. So once we have that, we identify the child. By the grace of God, they're identified as PDA. Then what? Well, first we need to lay the foundation. So parenting a PDA child, I'm going to tell you right now, is incredibly frustrating because we as a culture believe that adults basically bestow upon the child what they should be doing. You should be listening to me when I tell you to do these things. I'm the adult. You should respect me, all of these things. And the PDA doesn't do that. So it's incredibly frustrating for us. So the foundation of this is we have to believe that they are inherently good and doing the best that they can. They are not trying to piss us off. They're not trying to be mean to us. They're not trying to make our lives harder, and it's easy to perceive it that way, but at the end of the day, they're just doing the best that they can to survive. If we were to take out demand avoidance and superimpose, say, anxiety or depression, we would have a lot more empathy for that child. Oh, they're having a hard time. They're super anxious. They're worried. They're scared. Or my kid is sad or down. It's easy for us to empathize with that. But it's less easy to empathize with demand avoidance because it's frustrating to us. We want to understand what is and is not in the control of the PDA. So like we said, this is a nervous system reaction. So if you think about the average person who's in fight, flight, or freeze, they don't pick which one of those three they do. Their system just gives them the answer, and then you do it. Like if there's something chasing you, you don't have the choice of whether you run or freeze or fight back. It's kind of like this innate thing that happens. And so we have to really understand what is and is not in their control at any given time. And at the end of the day, the relationship between you and your child is the absolute primary thing you should be considering. Everything that you say and do, any services that you get them, any interventions that you do, the question should always be, how does this serve the relationship between me and my child? And we always, to the best of our abilities, want to take a more equal stance with the PDA child. So like we said, the premise is the loss of autonomy masked by a demand is what causes them to be dysregulated. So if they feel more equal to us, they're going to be less dysregulated. Our culture, like I said, puts parents in the role of superior. That's not going to work with the PDA child. So you're going to have to do the work of bringing yourself down to their level and allowing them to rise up and squeezing that difference between the two of you, because that's going to help regulate them. Like Miranda said, these kids are incredibly creative, incredibly dynamic and interesting, so we want to foster their creativity. We want them to step into who they are, and we want to love who they are, and we want them to feel that. And then we absolutely don't want to punish them for their feelings. We don't want to punish someone for feeling sad or down. We also don't want to punish someone for that looking like demand avoidance. So again, it's frustrating, but we have to do the best that we can to honor what they're feeling. So if you reach under your chairs right now, you'll find an oxygen mask. No one? Come on. Okay. So when you get into an airplane, one of the first things they say to you is, if the cabin loses pressure, put on your oxygen mask. Put yours on first before you put the mask on of a child. Now that might feel intuitively wrong, like we have this natural kind of mama bear energy to save our child. But if you're trying to put your child's mask on, and oh wait, I have another kid, put their mask on, oh my God, my husband's about to pass out, you are gonna pass out. You are not gonna do anyone any good if you can't breathe, figuratively or literally. So you need to put your oxygen mask on first. And basically what that means is we have to regulate ourselves first. If our child's amped up and they're equalizing and they're having a hard time and we get amped up with them and we're in this power battle, it's not gonna work. So the more we can regulate ourselves and calm ourselves down and take care of ourselves, the better we're gonna do at parenting. We also have to reflect on our history. How were we parented? What were we taught about being a parent? What were we taught about being a good parent? Do I have any childhood trauma that's making this kid coming at me and not listening to me? Does that kick any of that stuff up? So there's a lot of self-reflection in being a PDA parent. And you can do that on your own, or you can do that with the help of a therapist, but at the end of the day, it has to be done. And again, it goes back to the relationship. You are building your relationship today for tomorrow. The relationship, how you treat your child now, is going to impact whether they're 15 and actually want to tell you something, or 20 and still text you when they're in college. You are building the relationship for tomorrow, today. So before we get into what does work with PDA, let's talk a little bit about what doesn't work with PDA. Well, unfortunately, it's kind of your standard parenting techniques. So this might require an entire overhaul of what you thought parenting was going to be. But by doing so, you're going to be a lot more successful. So these are the things that kind of don't work. So strict boundaries and strict routines kind of makes sense. Like, kids need boundaries and routines so they know what to expect. And a lot of, like, if you're parenting a neurotypical child, or even, maybe an autistic child without a PDA profile, that might work. But this will not work with a PDA child, because being overly stringent and overly strict is going to kick up the nervous system, and you're going to start the day off wrong. Reward systems and punishments. So again, with classic parenting, reward systems seem like a good idea. If you do your homework, you get 1 hour of screen time, and the kid works really hard and they get their screen time. And that's a lot better than if you don't do your homework, you get no screen time, so punishment. But in either case, neither of these work really well with PDA kids, because it's a demand. If I'm like, do this thing, you will get the reward, that's a demand. And then let's say they do the thing and they get the reward, and then enjoying the reward is a demand. Even though it's a fun demand, it's still a demand. And so these reward systems, sticker systems, token economies, they don't work very well for PDA kids. Limiting screen time. Again, there's a lot of controversy around this. Get the kids off the screen, have them go out and play. And so the research doesn't back that up for neurotypical or neurodivergent children in general. So the research actually says giving neurodivergent children a little bit more screen time is not a bad thing, because it's about cost and benefit. So the kid could use that to calm down their sensory experience. They could use screen time to engage in their special interest, Minecraft or whatever it is. It gives them time to just de-escalate, be on their own, calm down. So not everything can be applied to every child. So screen time for neurodivergent kids and specifically PDAers, it's kind of worth the benefits at the expense of the cost. And then we also don't want to encourage them to mask. We don't want to encourage them to push through because that's just basically pushing them closer to burnout. And then overloading your child's schedule or using too much therapy or programming. So less is more, I guess. Like we don't necessarily want to encourage the PDAer to have a tutor once a week and go to swim classes and play soccer and then be in their ABA therapy twice a week. That's literally something every single day. A PDAer is not going to be able to do that because the demands are too high. So we have to really look at, okay, of these things, what do they absolutely need to do? And of these things, what brings them the most joy? And you might want to pick one of the three things versus doing all of them. With a PDA kid, more is not better. And then we absolutely don't want to shame or guilt our child, regardless of their neurotype, but specifically with PDA, because that puts them again in that kind of one-down position where they feel like you're up here and they're down there and what they're doing is wrong. So what does work? So these are some general concepts. So choice, independence, a lower demand lifestyle, encouraging them to be creative and self-expressive, encouraging them to engage in their passions or their interests, connecting through being seen as an equal with you, meeting their sensory needs, and then the last one's important, regulating through the parent-child relationship. So that's what I was saying earlier. If you're calm, it's a lot easier for your child to be calm. It's co-regulation between the two of you. And these things just work much better than the previous slide. So as far as what resources are out there for PDA, so the PDA Society is a good option. PDA North America, or pdana.org, I want to say. So the PDA Society has this graphic, and it talks about 5 different areas. Now you can view each of these things as independent interventions, or I like to think of PANDA as like an overall parenting style or way of being. So P stands for pick your battles. And this is really important because we have to ask ourselves, why am I asking this person to do the thing? Why does it matter? Does the outcome really matter? So I'll give you an example. This time last year, our daughter wore Christmas pajamas to school every day for 6 months. 6 months. And we got into this situation with her. We're like, should we throw the pajamas away? Can you wear something else? And she dug her heels in. She didn't. She wore it for 6 straight months. And at the end of the day, why does it matter? Her pajamas were clean. Her pajamas covered her body. She got no negative feedback at work or school. She doesn't have a job. She thinks she does. She didn't get any feedback at school from her teachers. Like, there was no good reason besides just making me uncomfortable. So pick your battles. A, so adaptation. So being novel with how you ask the ask, using creativity, using humor. You might, let's say you're trying to get a 3-year-old to brush their teeth. You might let them brush your teeth. And I'm not going to lie to you, you're going to be a hot mess. There's going to be toothpaste in your hair. But you had this interesting interaction with your child. It was relational, and maybe they brushed their teeth at the end. So be creative and humorous. D, disguise and manage demand. So Miranda's going to talk a little bit about declarative language later, but there's a lot of ways to ask someone to do something that's not a direct ask. So a simple version of this would be, putting the kids' shoes by the front door in the morning when they're about to go to school, and then just say, okay, I think it's time for everyone to go to school. Miranda, are you going to put your shoes on? Like, I'm not talking to my daughter, but she sees the cue of her shoes, and she knows the routine. We have to put our shoes on before we leave. So I'm asking her in kind of a roundabout way. I'm showing her what I want her to do without asking explicitly. So you're kind of disguising the demand. And then N, negotiate and collaborate. So that goes back to what I said earlier about we want our child to feel relatively equal to us in some ways. So negotiating with them, giving them multiple options. In our household on Saturday mornings, the 3 of us sit down, Miranda and our daughter and I, and we say, okay, what does everyone want to do this weekend? What's the top of your list? What's the top of your list? What's the top of your list? And this is an equal conversation. Like, my wants and needs are not more important than hers. Now, like, we might negotiate, like, I have to go grocery shopping. And she's like, well, I want to go to Chuck E. Cheese. And like, these things might not go together, but we're talking about it, we're involving her in the conversation, we're negotiating and collaborating, and she's much more likely to go to the grocery store knowing that the next day we'll go to Chuck E. Cheese because I value what she wants to do. And then A, anxiety management. Keeping things as calm as possible. So letting my daughter know what to expect, what is coming up. So like having the conversation with her, like usually when you go to birthday parties, you get really dysregulated when the other kid gets to open the gifts. What do we need to do so you feel more empowered in that situation? Maybe you bring her a little gift that she opens on the side. Maybe she leaves before the gift giving situation happens. Or maybe she comes up with an idea that will be helpful. So like we're kind of telling her what's coming so that way she can prepare herself and try to keep, the anxiety at baseline as low as possible. So if something comes up, she'll have more wiggle room of where her anxiety will go. So this is Panda.
So how many of you have heard of low demand parenting? Yay! So a lot of these strategies we're going to talk through are helpful whether you have a PDA or not. They're specifically helpful for PDA, but if you have an autistic child and you're not sure if they're PDA, a lot of this stuff is going to be helpful regardless, and low demand parenting is one of those things. So I think we could probably all agree that whether you have a neurodivergent child or a child within the neuromajority, kids are overscheduled these days. They have too much on their plates. They are doing way too much. And I think we're seeing the impact on our kids, not even just our neurodivergent kids. But especially for a PDAer who's dysregulated by demands and by loss of autonomy, too many demands is not going to work. So we have to look at decreasing our demands overall when we're parenting a PDAer. So maybe those are demands at home, like usually you want your child to maybe bring their dish to the sink after dinner. Maybe you decide to drop that demand. Or maybe your child hates brushing their teeth and you're supposed to do it twice a day, but maybe you let them get away with once a day, at least while they're having a hard time. The way I think about this is in terms of burnout, we have sort of green, yellow, and red. So we have green, which means your child is thriving, whatever that looks like for them. We have yellow, teetering into burnout, and then we have red, meaning they are deep in burnout. And how we apply low demand parenting is going to be different depending on where your child is today. So if your child is in the green, we're still going to practice low demand because it's a great thing to do, right? We're going to make sure they don't have too much therapy. Maybe we're going to make sure that they don't have too many activities going on, because we know that's just good for kids in general. But maybe we're not going to do anything drastic. But if we move into, okay, maybe my child's teetering into burnout, they're in that yellow zone, we're going to take low demand a little further. We might start to make more accommodations within the home and drop demands around the home. And then if they're in red, we are basically going no demand, like as much as possible, except for safety stuff. So this isn't a one size fits all, but more of something you can adapt to your family and your child's current needs. One question we constantly get about low demand parenting is, well, what does this mean for the future for my child? If we start dropping all these demands, how will my child ever learn to be independent or learn new skills? And it's a great question. It's one that I have sat with a lot as a parent as well. But we have to understand how learning happens. Learning happens when we are in the green. When we are regulated, when we are connected, learning happens. It can't happen when your child's in burnout or teetering towards burnout. So if we keep those same demands, your child just stays in yellow and red. They don't get back to green. So low demand parenting is one way we can take a child that's either in burnout or about to be, and we can get them back into the green so that they can learn, they can grow, and they can thrive. So I think we need to also consider how we're coming off to these kids. If we know our child's struggling and we keep the same expectations of them, what message does that send? We don't see you. We don't see the pain that you have. But if you say, I see you're having a hard time, and I am going to modify what I expect of you during this time. Much like how when you have a cold, maybe you lower expectations for yourself. Maybe you're like, I'll just get through the day versus do everything. When your child's having a hard time, maybe they're burning out, we can't expect the same thing as when they're in the green. So that's how low demand parenting works as a whole. So what can it look like? So we already talked about limiting the amount of activities, but it might be kind of around hygiene or chores. It might be not putting strict limitations on screen time. Like maybe you're normally a family that has some screen time limits, but you know your kid is teetering into burnout. You might say, okay, I see you're having a hard time. I bet you're needing more regulation. Let's lean into more screen time right now. Let's lean into more special interest time. Maybe we switch up school to be virtual some of the time, or maybe we do unschooling or homeschooling. Maybe we need to make a big adjustment in this child's life. But picking battles around food, clothes, hygiene, all of these things, and not pushing for independent behavior. If your child's asking for help or they are struggling, just accepting that they really need the help and making accommodations for them. So I wanted to hit on sensory experiences of the PDAer. Probably most of you know about sensory experiences and how to accommodate, but I wanted to highlight that for PDAers, it's not just the sensory experience that's bothering them, because they are autistic and they do have a different sensory experience of the world, and that can be overwhelming. But there's this secondary piece of it, which is sensory experiences are demands. So if you have a scratchy shirt on and you're at school and you don't have any other shirt, now I'm experiencing that sensory experience, but I'm also experiencing a demand of, I have to wear this shirt. I'm stuck in this shirt. I don't have a choice. Or I'm in a loud room and I can't get out. So all that to be said, in the last slide, sensory issues are twice as dysregulating. So just really think about accommodating for sensory needs for PDAers. I want to talk a little bit about declarative language. Have any of you heard of declarative language? Okay, perfect. So declarative language is a skill you can use with anyone, but with PDAers specifically, to kind of disguise demands like we were talking about earlier. So instead of asking a direct question, it will have you state an observation. And there's a whole declarative language handbook that you can check out, and we'll reference it at the end of our slides if you're interested in knowing more about this. But the idea is, instead of saying, will you go feed the dog, right, which is going to be dysregulating for a PDAer, we would say, I hear the dog scratching in his bowl, right? Or, oh, it's been a while since I fed the dog, something like that. Or maybe you want your kid to brush your teeth. So instead of saying, go brush your teeth, you're going to say, I see the sun going down. Just those kind of subtle cues to help the PDAer to feel more autonomous, more on equal ground with you, and less dysregulated overall. So you're sensing a theme of letting go of control with PDA kids, because digging our heels in and being more controlling or more rigid with rules or expectations does not work. So we really want to focus on letting go of control, and that's really hard for parents, because we have been taught that a good parent means that your kid is eating a balanced diet. Being a good parent means your kid's room is clean. Being a good parent means your child's hair is brushed. Whatever those things that come up in your mind are, we have to let go of them to realize that a good parent is attuned to your child's needs and is caring and loving and respectful. And all of the rest of it we can let go of, because our kids need that to get back into the green. They need tons of flexibility, accommodation, and that could look some really weird ways. Your kid might not be looking like a traditional kid. They might be dressing a little bit different. They might be eating a little bit different, and you might face a lot of judgment for this type of parenting, because ultimately, they will say that this is what's making the problem happen. They'll say, oh, well, you're just being too flexible. You're not giving enough boundaries, but they don't really know about PDA, and they don't really know about this neurotype. So it takes a lot of letting go and kind of accepting that your life is going to look really different, and that you might receive even some judgment from other parents about that. I want to talk briefly about pretend play, especially if you have kids between the ages of 0 to 11. There is a reason that if you take your young child to therapy, it's play therapy, because play is therapeutic for kids, especially between parent and child. It's a wonderful relationship building tool, but especially for a PDAer, you can incorporate power into this. So teacher and student. Maybe your child is the teacher and you're the student. They get to tell you everything you're going to do that day. And that's resourcing their nervous system. It's making them feel safe and kind of putting a little bit more regulation into their day, especially when maybe they were at school all day being told what to do. And if you can integrate your child's special interest into this, that's even more bonus points, because you're getting that relational time of play, their special interest is regulating them, and then also they're getting that one-up play. This is going to be incredible. So, for example, my daughter's special interest is pregnancy. It's been that for a long time. So one of the things we play, she's OBGYN and I am pregnant woman. And it is hilarious, but she loves it. She gives me an epidural. It's the whole thing. But it is incredible. It's one of the best things I think you can do for young PDA kids is this kind of play, because they find a way to feel control and autonomy, and that really resources their nervous systems. I also wanted to talk for a minute about animals and props. Obviously, we know animals are therapeutic for everyone, but for PDAers, animals are incredible because animals don't ask anything of you. They just give you that unconditional love. They're never going to give you a demand. And they really feel a sense of safety with animals that they never feel with people. And in the family order, they have someone that they know more than. So for example, that maybe you have two parents and you have your child, and then you have maybe a goldfish or a dog. Well, they're not at the bottom of that totem pole anymore, and that feels really good. They know that they know more than the dog, right? And they know that they're kind of in charge of the dog, and therefore they feel kind of not that sense of being at the lowest at the household, and that really helps kids. I also want to talk about using puppets and props. We have our favorite Hamilton with us today, so I'll take him. So, I could ask my daughter, I could say, get ready for school, put on your clothes, or I could take out Hamilton and I could say, put on your clothes, it's freezing in here, I'm so cold. And she will laugh and, she'll race Hamilton to go put on her clothes, and it works. And it doesn't work all the time 24/7, but it is a tool, that can be used. And it feels so much less threatening coming from a puppet than from a person. And it's humorous and it's fun and it disguises the demand. And this kind of back and forth with your child, making things humorous, I think really works with PDAers incredibly well.
All right, so this is kind of a theme of what we've been talking about, but we want our child to be their authentic self. This is especially helpful for the PDA child. So if they want to wear Christmas pajamas for 6 months, then let them. If they want to wear all purple all day, every day, then let them. We want to actually encourage them to do the things that make them feel powerful, that make them feel their authentic selves, that they feel autonomous. I haven't said this yet, but PDAers, the part about autonomy is not they want to be alone. They don't want to do things completely on their own. They're not islands. It's about autonomy, not being alone. That distinction is really important. So when you're encouraging them to be autonomous, you're not encouraging them to be separate from you. You're just encouraging them to be who they are. So freedom of choice is really important. One intervention that you could do is called the power hour. So during that one specific time, an hour, now not everyone can do an hour, let's do the power 10 minutes, whatever you guys can build up to, but basically it gives the child the opportunity to be in complete control for that hour. And you don't want to promise this unless you really can do it. And you also want to talk to the child about safe ways to engage in the power hour. It doesn't mean that you're just going to throw everything out the window and let them do whatever they want, but you give them more choice. Like, you get to pick what we eat. You get to pick what we watch on TV. Miranda, you sit over there, and Ruth, you sit over there, and they get to be more powerful, at least for a short period of time. So the power hour is kind of a cool intervention that you could use with your PDA child. Strewing is commonly used in like the homeschool environment, where you're basically just putting things in the environment that the child might happen upon and interact with. So instead of asking my child, do you want to do an art project, or encouraging her to do the art project, I just might put some paper and pens around her or in her room, or I might put some painting options around her. Or you use this with food. Like sometimes I'll make our daughter a snack, and I'll put 5 different things, and I'll just sit it next to her and then leave. Drop and walk, basically. It takes away the demand of you encouraging them to do the thing. Miranda also talks about, if we want her to wear different clothes, just putting a bunch of different types of clothes in her drawers. She might happen upon them one day and put it on, and it has happened. So strewing is basically just kind of putting things in the environment that your child might be able to happen upon. And I want you to also understand this is not outcome-based. The goal isn't to make her do art or make her wear different clothes or make her eat the snack, but we're giving her the opportunity to do so if she wants to. So we've talked a lot about different types of parenting styles, different interventions that we can do. And we want to highlight that this is easier said than done. Like I've given you guys a long list. Even doing one of those things would be daunting, especially for any longer period of time, more or less doing more than one of those things. So I really want to highlight that we don't expect you to do all of these things. We do expect you to try and see if it works with your child. And also there's going to be some grief that comes up because your thoughts about what you thought your family structure would look like, what your child's life is going to look like, it's going to have to change. So if you did say lessen the amount of things that you do as a family. So Kate actually kind of talked about this earlier in the keynote. Like maybe we won't have the same way of vacationing, for example. Maybe we won't go on a vacation for a while. Maybe it'll look different than other families. Like there's some grief around that and there's some processing of that. But we have to renegotiate our priorities in order to be the best parents for our children. And we have to get help for ourselves. Like burnout is inevitable when parenting, but it increases that much faster parenting a neurodivergent child, and it increases that much faster parenting a PDA child. So giving yourself that grace is really important. And then lastly, our children, our PDA kids, any of our children, they don't exist in a bubble. They're not off by themselves. They are interacting with all of these different systems all the time. The family, the extended family, schools, doctors, culture, our society, these systems we're constantly engaging in them. So as parents, we have to be the loudest voices in the room. We are our children's advocate, especially PDA children, when maybe their teachers aren't understanding why they're avoiding the demand, or your mother-in-law is not understanding why the child's avoiding the demand, or maybe even the doctor doesn't get what's going on. The more you educate yourself, the more you know what's going on, and you are going to be your child's biggest advocate. You have to be, because no one else will. So what services should you use for a PDA kid? Well, like I said, less is more, and I really think that that's true. I put on the top of this list parent coaching because I think this is actually the most helpful intervention. So I think it's natural as parents, we're like, we want to get them the best therapy possible and do it as frequently as possible. Yes, but also the best way to help your child is actually to help yourself. So PDA coaching is basically learning how to parent a PDA child. So talking to a therapist who understands PDA, who can support you being a parent of a PDA child, getting the information, talking back through those parenting techniques, and then they can help support you in implementing them. So PDA parent coaching is really important. Neurodiversity affirming occupational therapy. So making sure that that therapist understands, like, we don't want to change our child, but we want to encourage them, we want to accommodate them, we want them to make strides on their own trajectory, and having an occupational therapist could be helpful. OT play and DIR floor time. So this is kind of challenging to find in San Diego County. We've looked, there are some providers, and if you can find it, this is probably like the best option. So the reason why these two types of therapies are helpful are, first of all, they are based on your child's development. They have a good understanding of neurodivergence. They are relationship based. So the relationship between the therapist and the client, or the client and their parent, it's all about building that relationship. And it's not super outcome based, it's play therapy. So there's a lot of, different opinions when it comes to, say, ABA therapy. But I will say that ABA therapy in particular doesn't work very well for PDA, specifically because a lot of what ABA focuses on is outcome-based, like getting the child to do a thing or getting a child to do less of a thing, and that does not work very well for PDA. So PDA and ABA, they don't go very well together. But OT play and DIR floor time are better because they're relationship-based, they're play-based, and they're developmental-based. And then there are a list of providers on the PDANA.org website. There's different lists for different areas. So you can look in California, you can look specific in San Diego, and there's our list of providers who understand what PDA is and care enough to be on this list. So that list is somewhere where you might go if you're looking for a specific therapist in this area. And then these are just a list of those resources. So PDA Society, PDA North America, Neurodivergent Insights is that website that I talked about that has the really cool graphics. And they do have some PDA content on there, but they just have really amazing neurodiversity affirming content on there. And then sallycatpda.co.uk. So Sally Cat is a person, I can't remember if you said that they have a PDA child, if they're identified as PDA.
I can't remember. I think they have a PDA child at minimum.
Okay, so Sally Cat is an advocate for PDA. They have their own website. They have like podcasts. They have a book coming out, I want to say. They have really good content on their website. They also created a self-report measure that asks a bunch of questions. I think there's like 80 of them, and it'll help you figure out like where this person falls on the PDA spectrum. Like, are they showing a lot of PDA traits? Are they not? So that is a really cool test that's on their website. So these are some helpful books. The first two are not specific to PDA, but Miranda touched on them. Low Demand Parenting, and this book in particular is really good. And then the Declarative Language Handbook, how to use declarative language, what is declarative language, how to implement it. And then the two books specific to PDA are PDA by PDAers, and that's actually written by Sally Cat. And I really think it's important that if someone's talking about something, they should be, especially if their voice is the loudest, they should have lived experience in that area. So Sally Cat, she has lived experience with PDA, and she wrote this book, so I can trust what she's saying, maybe to a further degree. And then the family experience of PDA. Again, Kate talked about this in her keynote. Autism is like a family diagnosis. Everyone is impacted by that. Same thing with PDA. So the family experience, how does the sibling respond to that? How do the parents respond to that? It impacts everyone. So it's really important that, that's discussed. All right. Thank you all for being here. We do have 15 minutes left for questions. So if anyone has a question they'd like to ask, Miranda and I would be happy to field that now. Go ahead.
I'm so sorry. Can we grab a microphone down so that everybody can be able to hear your question? Sorry, we're going to put you on the spot. Thank you.
Are you able to share how you kind of like figured out how your daughter has PDA? You said she doesn't. Like the characteristics?
Sure. Yeah, so I mean, I'm still kind of labeling my daughter as like neurospicy because we're still figuring out. She's pretty young. But I mean, it was a rough time. It was, 2020, pandemic times, and we were having some of the worst parenting years of our lives, some of the hardest ones, and a lot of like online Googling, and sort of led us to more and more information. I was already kind of working in neurodiversity spaces, but it really resonated for our family, and it was something that I was like, oh, look at this, and we kind of went back and forth, and I even resonate to some degree with the profile myself. So, looking at that as like an adult version of like, I am self-employed, and I really make my own schedule, and I love to be autonomous, and like, maybe that's the adult version of, of PDA is, maybe we are accommodating it more in adulthood. So it also resonated personally for me as well.
And I know when we started looking at her through that lens, my empathy for her just skyrocketed. Like if she was doing something and I'm like, and if I put it through the lens of, okay, she's having demand avoidance, so this is secondary to autism, is like my empathy for her just changed completely. So it really impacted my parenting style just as far as how I felt about her. And how you feel about your child impacts how you parent them. And so I think that our relationship has grown so much just by, seeing her through that lens. Sure.
For those of us who have kiddos with autism and ADHD, is there something, is PDA related at all to ADHD? Does the research speak to that? And is there anything special that might be going on with those folks that have both? And also, thank you. This is a wonderful presentation.
Thank you. I would say we see demand avoidance in most neurodivergent people. And if you go back to the slide where I was talking about the why, like if an ADHDer avoids demands for a different reason than an autistic person would. So an ADHDer might avoid a demand because they're just not interested in what you're saying, or they're having a hard time focusing on what you're saying, or they messed something up and they're covering up, and so they're avoiding other parts of the demand. But when you have the interplay between autism and ADHD, it kind of complicates the picture because it's kind of like different sides of their brains, and it depends on what they're giving you in the moment. But there is lots of demand avoidance in ADHD. So if you're seeing demand avoidance in your child, it's hard to know, is this the PDA profile of autism? Is this ADHD? I will also say that autistic people can have demand avoidance and not be PDA. So it kind of colors the picture even further. But autistic people, of course, have demand avoidance. True PDA is when that demand avoidance is persistent, it's ongoing, it's really about their nervous system. It's part of who they are. It's their neurotype, and they're rooted in that. And I think it'll just take time for you to figure out what you're seeing.
Again, super helpful presentation, and especially being able to power through after the medical challenge, so thank you so much. This may be, I don't know if this is too specific of a question, but the profile the sub-profile slide that you listed, some traits that may include. One of my questions is there, do you have an idea of do they need to have all of these traits? Some of that, because I realize this is not a diagnosis where it's like you have 3 out of 7, but some of these my son really, really fits, and some he doesn't. And so I'm just not sure which of them, because when I deep dive this, they were like, often these kids have a very high IQ, which you did not put on your list, but that is not, my son. So I'm just kind of wondering if how you think about that.
Yeah, sure. I can take this one. So I think how many traits we see is like very correlated to how much accommodation you're giving, right? So if a child's in a super accommodating environment and they're PDA, we might see a lot less traits because we're seeing less equalizing behavior. But if they're really not in an accommodating environment, we might see a lot of these traits. So I think it also depends on what you're doing at home, what kind of demand lifestyle you're in, how much you might see these things coming through. In terms of like IQ and how that relates?
I would say people with high IQs are just inherently kind of innovative thinkers, and they don't need other people to validate what they're thinking because they're probably the smartest person in the room. So it kind of makes sense that that would go with PDA, because if your child is processing things quickly and they understand it maybe better than you do just because they're so smart, it kind of naturally leads to, I don't have to abide by your demand because I almost naturally see ourselves as equal because my cognitive abilities are higher. And I think that's part of what makes that connection.
No, I don't think those two things need to be connected, because I think there's a correlation between those two things, but probably not part of the profile necessarily. I think a lot of PDAers tend to be intelligent, but I don't think that those two things have to go together necessarily. That's a really good question. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rachel. I have an odd ADHD or plus PDA phenotype, a son who's 6.5 right now. And thank you so much for this, because a lot of the things that we've learned in the past year were here. So it was very affirming as a parent. I was texting my husband, like, we're on the right track, because we have seen so much growth with our son over the past year at home. Of course, the question that a lot of parents are talking about is about when we send them to school and with education, and we're really trying to navigate that path with advocates and attorneys and lots of things like that. But my question really is, do you have any recommendations or suggestions on how to support our child? Because perhaps traditional school isn't the right way, but as navigating through that process, it's very difficult. So I just want to know kind of what avenues you guys have seen success with parents who have children that really want to support their authentic selves.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of variability when it comes to the school's willingness to bend, and that's what we're asking them to do. We're asking them to accommodate. And so there are some schools who kind of dig their heels in and they're completely unwilling, or they don't have a lot of education, even in neurodivergence, and so there's a lot of resistance there. But then there are some schools that are more able to do that. So you're kind of doing everything right in that you're trying to get on board, like making sure the IEP lines up and has PDA-specific interventions. Can I have the help of a lawyer that's kind of pushing those things along? But at the end of the day, it goes back to what we were saying earlier, like what we thought our child's life was going to be like might not be what it is. And they might have to be unschooled or homeschooled or go to a charter school, and we have to kind of roll with that based on what's going on. And just because you go into homeschool doesn't mean you have to stay there. Like they could, get some of their stuff under control, or they could go out of burnout and they can go back into the school environment. But again, like our schools, our mental health providers, we're catching up very slowly. But there are certain PDA-specific interventions that you can advocate for on an IEP. Lauren, where did you get those PDA ones? Was there a specific website you had that on? Yeah, because the accommodations that you would have for an autistic person are not the same as the accommodations that you would ask for a PDA child. And so Lauren does have a resource for that. There's a really good list of, say, like 15 that you should just automatically ask for. Yeah.
How do you diagnose PDA, and do we need to have a diagnosis of PDA for the school system to intervene, let's say for an IEP? That's one question. And there's another question. What can a parent try if low-demand parenting is not working?
How do you know it's not working? With my question back. So it takes time. Like low-demand parenting is a complete overhaul of our understanding of what parenting is, and also our child's understanding of how they're parented. So it could take months, if not years, to really see the benefit of low-demand parenting. So I don't think that low-demand parenting doesn't work in any situation. It really depends on, is everyone on board with it? How much longevity can we have in doing it, and really leaning into committing to doing it. It's going to take a lot of time. As far as answering your question about how you get the diagnosis, so PDA is not a diagnosis at this point. Like they can't get a diagnosis that doesn't exist. Now, if you can find a psychologist who has good understanding of PDA, the best that you can do is get a report that says this person's autistic and they have a PDA profile, and then they might even verbalize PDA is not in the DSM-5, but these are the traits that they are showing, and then you could take that potentially to a school, into an IEP situation. But unfortunately, they can't diagnose it because it's not official on paper, but they can verbalize it in like maybe the written form of their evaluation.
Mm-hmm. The creator, I think, is under NeuroWild. That's like their logo on the sheet. And that's not PDA specific, it's neurodiverse, but there are a lot of accommodations and pages of accommodations suggestions, and a lot of those are really helpful for PDAs.
Okay, so NeuroWild is a good opportunity.
PDA North America as well has a lot of specific IEP language and accommodations that you can ask for that's very PDA specific as well, and they have that all free on their website as like PDFs. They have something you can send to teachers, school counselors that are working with your kid to give them better understanding. So they have a lot of great tools on that website as well.
The first one is Teachers Pay Teachers, and the second one is NeuroWild. And then PDA North America, sorry. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, one is earlier you said that PDA is not an official diagnosis. So are they diagnosing under ODD? Because when I've asked are they sort of like borderline, those two?
See, it's a kind of an unfortunate situation because it's so ambiguous still. Yeah. A lot of PDAers will get misdiagnosed with ODD because if you think an ODD profile, you see kids who are like not wanting to do what you say or being a little bit more sneaky in what they do. Now, Miranda and I are under the assumption that ODD is actually trauma-based. So this is childhood trauma being manifested in a behavioral way. That's completely different from someone who's autistic. This is their neurotype, and they have a PDA profile. That's their neurotype. It doesn't matter. Trauma is not really part of that. But unfortunately, these kids who are actually PDA are getting misdiagnosed with ODD or misdiagnosed with extreme anxiety or misdiagnosed with a lot of things. And part of that is we don't have enough education on it. And the other part is like providers don't have a diagnosis where they can be like, here's the criteria, bing, bang, boom, and give it to you. So we're still catching up. And so I would be careful with the ODD diagnosis because, again, I feel like that's more trauma-based.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you for clarifying.
I'm glad she asked about ODD, so I can ask my other question instead. And this, I know it might be too new, at least in this country, but what happens with PDA as people become adults, especially when there is, when there's the right intervention, like the low demand parenting in childhood, is there any research that shows what happens as they become adults?
So in terms of research, unfortunately, there's such a little amount of research on PDA in general. So there isn't a lot in terms of concrete. But from my perspective, I think there are sort of two camps. There's sort of the camp of they never know that they're PDA adults, and so they're in the world very dysregulated. Maybe they don't even know that they're autistic or neurodivergent. They've never been identified, but maybe they have like substance use issues and depression and anxiety or bipolar has been diagnosed. So sometimes it goes down a road that can be really difficult, especially if you never know what's going on with you or why you're feeling what you're feeling. And then I think sometimes people kind of figure it out and they're able to start making accommodations for themselves, by being self-employed or by being with very flexible partners maybe even, or making accommodations in their life for sensory because they've kind of figured out what's going on for them. So I think some adults kind of are able to figure out what's happening and make those accommodations, and that actually can be very regulating for people, and we might not even see a lot of PDA traits in those folks unless certain stressors are going on. But then there are people that maybe never figure out that they're PDA and then become adults, and there's a lot of unfortunate consequences, I think, of that. You have anything to add to that?
I was just going to say, in the adult version, the PDA, so as a child, the PDA shows up a lot with teachers or parents. The adult version of that is with partners and their children and their boss. And so having that understanding about yourself of why you're responding and then being able to talk to your partner about that. Like, I'm not trying to not take out the trash. It's just the ask of it is really dysregulating. So being in, say, mixed neurotype couples therapy, for example. So that means one partner has a different neurotype than the other. So maybe neurotypical and PDA, but having the conversation about what's going on between the partners, because that's probably where you're going to see it show up.
We
have 2 minutes later. Were you standing up for a question? So we'll go ahead and take your question.
Well, mine was similar. So I'm Kelly, and I have a PDA, adult PDA in burnout, and so the declarative language and stuff can be really like it's almost designed a little bit more for kids, and like you try it and they look at you like, why are you talking to me like that? And so any I don't know if you can push the needle to more resources on because in your tone of voice and because they're so sensitive to eye roll or everything. It's not as easy to implement the declarative language than I would have thought. So any advice on how to do that, I would love to hear it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question because I think PDAers are very attuned to power differential. And if you're still trying to get them to do something, even if you're doing it with declarative language, there's a sense of that starts to happen. So I think you have to, I think really monitor tone, and I think it has to be said in a way that is very equal. Like it can't be, transparent. I think it really has to be, like we're not trying to trick the PDAer into doing something. It's more like, I want you to feel respected as I bring this forward. So I feel like I think declarative language can sometimes feel like we're trying to trick the PDA nervous system, which is definitely not what we're trying to do. It's more, how do I present this in a way that gives this person an opportunity to do this thing? And if they don't, that's okay. Like it's not outcome based in the sense of, we need this thing to happen, and so we're going to trick this person into it. And I think sometimes that can how it can come off to PDAers to some degree. So I think you have to have a lot of genuineness and authenticity in how you're presenting it, and then ultimately, kind of be open to this outcome might not happen, and it's, we don't want the PDAer to feel a sense of being manipulated by language or that you're weaponizing declarative language to get your way in the household, because I think that can even have the opposite effect.
And I think at the adult level, there's more like natural consequences. Like if the adult PDAer doesn't do something, they're the ones who have to contend with the outcome of that. And so they will decide what they do based on what their goal is. And so those natural consequences will happen for the adult, I think, a lot of times.
And I think Ruth uses declarative language with me sometimes too. And I think most of the time it works, because it's like, it's not, we should work on our presentation. It's, oh yeah, our presentation's in April, and then I'm like, oh, okay, like we got to work on it. Or, so I think, it does, I think, feel better ultimately than someone saying, do this thing, but it's more open-ended. Do you want, if she kind of throws that out there, I could be like, oh yeah, whatever. Or I could say, oh yeah, we should work on that. And it kind of gives me some control on how I respond versus feeling like she's asking me to do something right then and there, which could be triggering. So I think it's all in the way in which you present it, and I think it's a craft and a practice. And sometimes those things do go south, where you do declarative language and your kid could have a negative response. It definitely can happen. And also, every intervention is not for every PDAer either. So I think, declarative language might not be for every PDA kid. Maybe they have a specific reaction to that. Some sites even say that some PDAers don't like praise. Right, and that praise can be very triggering. And then I know PDAers that are totally fine with praise. So I think also there is a lot of individual difference amongst PDAers as well in terms of what they respond to.
All right. Well, I want to give a big thank you to Ruth and Miranda. They have been super troopers going for 2 breakouts with us, so I really, really appreciate it. I also, I think I might have forgotten, but I really want to thank the medical responders in this room. This was apparently a really good place to have a medical emergency because we had a line of doctors, so good to know. But also I want to thank you as an audience. You guys were wonderful and handled all of this breakout very beautifully. Thank you for coming out. Please check out the Autism Society San Diego.org. We have lots of programming to help throughout the rest of the year, and we're looking forward to having you all back next year for our next Autism Social and Mental Health Conference.